Yeah, very good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday, business day today. And today, well, we've got an interesting focus here, Elvis. We're talking about mining. We're talking about the entire value chain about mining a little bit today. A special focus on safety because, Elvis, that's been the thing that's kind of been in the media, in the spotlight a little bit the last couple of weeks.
Well, it's something that the Mineral Resources Minister, Mosebenzi Zwane, has criticised some of the mining companies for not doing enough to make the working environment of the miners safe, Eben. And that is why we're asking that question to you this morning. To all our viewers out there, we're asking you, are you concerned about the safety of the miners in our country? That's the question we pose. You would like to get your thoughts on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom as well as on the Facebook page.
Quite a few tweets have come in already. Jamila Askeif says, yes, absolutely, mine workers are risking their lives when they go down the shaft. They should always be protected by their employers.
Yeah, fair comment. Good comment. Katlejo says, nothing scares me more than hearing miners trapped for days underground. I believe we can avoid others, but earthquakes and natural disasters are something else. That is true. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about safety because that's been the discussion that's going on. But mining has more issues than just safety. There are many other issues.
A lot more. And that boils down to sustainability of a mine. Can the mine afford to still operate, and can the miner still be paid? Yep. That's a question, so let's put up that poll for you. Is mining becoming unsustainable in South Africa, Kendall?
113 votes have come in so far. Interesting enough, 86% of our respondents say yes, it is becoming unsustainable in SA.
When you're talking unsustainability, what are you talking about? Is it labour? Is labour too difficult? Is investment too much of a risk? What are the key issues mining faces in South Africa? Nazim tells us, obviously, he says, we must be concerned about the lives of people going underground. Is no child's play. That's from Unati Grootboom.
Jamila van der Skyf says the workers don't have the proper equipment to use down the mines and no safety regulations are taken in consideration. So it means that people are still talking about the safety issue of mines. But we want to know about sustainability. You can let us know, what do you think about sustainability of the mines? Can the mines still make profit and give to their shareholders, or do they have to look after the miners or perhaps close the mine? Like we've just seen, one of the latest mines also been retrenching 2,600 miners.
We hear a constant narrative of us, and that narrative is, oh, it's not an investment destination for overseas investors anymore in South Africa. There are too many problems, labor problems, investment risk. You can go down the value chain. We'll talk about all of that today. But we're also asking a question, a sports question today, Kendall, and we see a lot of people are very interested in this. It looks like we have a golden generation of athletes coming through here in South Africa, and Athletics South Africa are in the spotlight. Are they doing enough? Is that it?
That's the question that needs to be asked, and it's being asked right now. They can't get it right, it seems. They're always in trouble. The question we're asking you, should Athletics South Africa do more to support young talent?
This one from Nazim says, we have a great young talented athletes here in South Africa. They need more support. Now we've seen them, Kendall, of course, at the latest
the youth championships.
Yeah, they sweep there. But we've also got current athletes that are doing well. And this one says to us, I was watching the IWF World Under-18 Championships in Nairobi. SA young athletes performed exceptionally great. More, I don't know more what, but more should be done for them, is what I say. They should be exposed to international competition a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit about that, myself and Kendall, at about 9:50 today. Don't miss it, and tweet us what you think on this issue, because I know South Africans love athletics. But we've got to get into our work now. Let's get the headlines with us.
The Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises is expected to convene in Parliament later today to investigate Eskom. The lights might go out. The inquest into the death of the anti-apartheid struggle stalwart Ahmed Timol continues today. And a man is to appear in court in relation to the shooting of two siblings in front of their family members in Alexandra. Those are some of your headlines. But before we get there, let's find out from Kendo Makamate what's happening on the sports front.
Elvis, quite a lot happening on the sports front, as we just chatted as well. A lot of kickback, a lot of pushback on ASA about the selection for the World Champs. But you know what, Evan, I think that chat's going to be interesting a little later.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and I see people are tweeting us plenty already with regards to athletics. It just shows people are passionate about athletics, and keep tweeting us, keep sending us questions. We'll put it forward, and we'll try and get the stakeholders involved at some point with this discussion.
100%. Good morning to you. This is what we have for you in the sports today.
Used a very high standard, high criteria to make sure that our athletes do not go there and be eliminated in the first round.
South Africa's senior athletes bemoan Athletics South Africa's selection criteria, which they say excludes future medal prospects from international exposure. The Proteas are looking forward to the return of star seamer Kagiso Rabada for the third test as they look to get the noses in front of England in their 4-test series. And condolences pour in for the family of rugby legend Willie Lebom Zankosha, who succumbed to cancer at the age of 71. Of course, in the 10 o'clock hour, we'll also be chatting to Thando Manana, former Springbok, on his new book of being a black Springbok. But more about this a little later. For now, do stay with Elvis as he's got the news.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this hour. The Public Enterprise Committee is expected to convene in Parliament later today. Members of the committee are to be briefed by the legal advisors on how to proceed with the Eskom investigation and who can legally be called or summoned to testify. Meanwhile, the Democratic Alliance has welcomed the Public Protector's decision to investigate the Eskom board for approving what the party calls a multi-million rand golden handshake to the former CEO, Brian Molefe. The DA requested the investigation after it emerged that the board had approved a 30 million rand pension payout to Molefe after working for only 18 months as the CEO of Eskom. The decision caused a major public outrage. Molefe was later reinstated, but the Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown has since rescinded the decision. The African National Congress in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal want the Gupta family to be properly investigated. The provincial working committees met in Mbombela over the weekend and discussed challenges facing the ANC and the ongoing calls for the President Jacob Zuma to step down.
All the negative aspects that are accompanied by this relationship between the President and the Guptas. We want to distance ourselves from that, and it is our view that it's time that the Guptas must allow the ANC to execute its duties.
We are emerging from this engagement with a clear view that the conduct presented in number of newspapers and in the media at large, the conduct of the Guptas represent the West we could expect. And if it is proven, serious actions must be taken. And that's why we affirmed the ANC and EC decision that says there must be a proper investigation on their conduct.
The inquest into the death of Ahmed Timol in 1971 continues today. In yesterday's testimony, anti-apartheid activist Stephanie Kemp refuted apartheid security claims that SACP members were instructed to commit suicide rather than betray the party during interrogation.
Still trying to unravel Timol's death at the then John Vorster police station. The magistrate in the 1972 inquest relied on a document that allegedly contained the suicide instruction. Stephanie Kemp, a London-based undercover agent for the SACP, dismissed this. She and Timol exchanged secret documents before he was arrested.
It's like a checklist. It just doesn't. I don't think we would have been that prescriptive to anybody. Most of the people in the group, except myself, had not been in detention. I don't think we would have told people this is what you must do.
Earlier, the inquest heard how sleep deprivation and torture were standard practice at John Vorster Square. Former police officer Francois Erasmus described how he and a fellow officer broke into the home of Dr. Neil Aggat's parents in Somerset West. This in an attempt to try and make Aggat's death in detention look like suicide. Matla Kokomane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The suspect is expected to appear in court in connection with the gunning down of the 25 and 23-year-old siblings Itumeleng and Tsepo Sefolo in full view of their family. The suspect, whose identity has yet to be revealed, has allegedly been terrorizing the community in Alexandra Township north of Johannesburg. The incident and the police handling of the matter prompted the police minister to visit the Alex police station, where he read them the riot act. Now, we'll keep you updated on that story as it unfolds here. But right now, let's get down to that theme. We're talking mining safety and sustainability. It's over to Eben to start that conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jarvis, and a very good morning to our viewers. If you have just joined us now, the Minister of Mineral Resources here in South Africa, Mr. Mozabenzi Zwane, he says mining companies should do more to ensure that their employees are safe at all times. Now, this comes after 4 miners died at the Taulekwa gold mine in Orkney in the Northwest Province. Minister Zwane says mining companies should value the lives of their employees more.
We want also to thank the management of this mine called Taulekwa for having spent 12 months without any fatality in a gold sector. We believe they are doing very well, and having lost 4 lives at a go will never please us. We're still very firm in terms of ensuring that every worker goes to work in the morning and come back and see their families. We have already talked with our team to investigate this matter further, and we are happy that the management works together with us so that we take this matter forward and close it. We have met with the families earlier today, and we're giving our commitment that we will be represented in all these funerals, because we want our workers to be buried with dignity. Not only that, we'll also follow up in terms of the policy that has been presented to us, in terms of looking after the deceased family moving forward. For death cannot be accepted. We want to call upon all the mining companies to beef up security, because our workers, our people have value to this government, and I'm sure they must have value also to their place of work.
Yeah, on the back of that is why we're asking you the question of the day. It deals directly with safety, of course, and what are your concerns about the safety of miners in our country? We'll speak to some of the experts a little bit later, and I'll take a look at your tweets a little bit later. Tweet them now, and we'll put them up as we carry on. Of course, we're always running a poll on the Newsroom show every day, and the poll deals with mining sustainability in South Africa. Are our mines becoming too expensive for international investment? Are our labor difficulties becoming insurmountable? Is mining in general becoming unsustainable in South Africa? What are your views on it? 122 votes are in. 84% are saying yes, mining's becoming unsustainable in South Africa. Now, I'll put this to our expert a little bit later, and I'll also ask the representatives of the workers what they think about sustainability, and of course, they call it excuses by mining companies around sustainability. But do we compete with ourselves, or do we compete with other mines in other countries? These are questions we have to answer today. But let's go to Twitter now and see what you guys are talking about. Of course, the second day in the Ahmed Timol inquest is underway a little bit later. Of course, the case dates back to 1971. Yesterday, testimonies from apartheid figures let out many secrets about what's happening, follow that case, and what's being said. We'll be there live a little bit later today, expected to go live at about 10:30 or about somewhere there. That's the time they started yesterday with the Timol inquest. Interesting information coming out. Then, the Department of Environmental Affairs yesterday confirmed that there's a decrease in the number of rhinos poached this year compared to last year. 13, is that really a decrease? However, the Kruger National Park has been attacked with around 30 elephants poached this year alone. Last year, the number was 46 for the entire year. 30 gone already by this time of the year. That's rhino stats. Moving further afield, Sri Lanka rescue teams saved 2 elephants that were swept out to sea after venturing too far into the waters to bathe. Hashtag Sri Lanka. What a sad story. Then people are talking about Michael Phelps' shark race. Yes, however, it wasn't against a real shark, but digitally edited one, to the disappointment of many fans. Can you imagine that? Hashtag Michael Phelps. In Kabul, an explosion has ripped through the university campus there in the city. Investigations are still underway. We'll keep you posted on our news bulletins as to what is happening in Kabul. Now, we move on to our picture of the day today. Now, this picture comes from Max de Prayer, and it's captioned, "My treasured old friend and journalistic comrade Henny Serfontein has died." There's a picture of Henny Serfontein. De Prayer goes on, he says he was a legend and the first one that exposed the Broederbond. Makes him sad. Of course, he was a great anti-apartheid activist also, Henny Serfontein. No doubt he will be missed. Now, let's move on to our comment of the day. This one comes from Neo Yaka, who says, "Listening to Erasmus and reading up on the court proceedings got me so emotional. Damn, apartheid was brutal." Talking about the Timol inquest. Of course, that came out during testimony yesterday. Some of the stuff that happened was just incredible. Incredible. Torture, jumping, throwing people up windows. Can you imagine that? Yeah, that's where we are. Let's take a look now at what's in the courts. Of course, we'll start there in Pretoria. You see on the screen where the Timol inquest resumes. Now, this 1972 inquest found that he had died in detention after jumping from the 10th floor building at John Foster Square. That will be tested. Now, in the Northern Cape, where a woman accused of poisoning 3 boys and killing a young girl will now reapply for bail in the Motibistad Magistrates Court. The Kimberley High Court has overruled a decision taken by the Magistrates Court which denied the accused bail. Those are the courts today. We'll keep you updated on those and other stories as they develop in the courts. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we'll speak to an expert around safety and sustainability in the mining sector here in South Africa. Don't miss that.
What guides us? Is it something you can touch, hear, feel, or see? What leads us on to greater experiences? Is it leaders on a soapbox, spouting rhetoric for the crowd? The advice of our elders? Or is it the actions of our people? The strength of our beliefs? Or the voices of our citizens? Your country is guided by the voices of its people, and your broadcaster is dependent on your voice to guide it. Get your copy of the SABC's editorial policy and have your say.
Why is there a dispute over who is the rightful heir to the throne?
What I can say is that Masindi is a woman. She's a girl. She's a girl child. Because I think that if she was a male, there's no way that anybody was going to dispute the fact that she is the rightful heir.
Do you recognize her as your rightful heir?
Yeah, no, I would definitely say that she is my daughter. She grew up there.
What is the intention?
I want my throne.
Join me in Port Zedu live every Monday to Thursday at 17:30.
Welcome back. Now, the Mineral Resources Minister, Mosebenzi Zwane, has criticized the Taulekwa gold mine in Orkney, northwest, for what he terms not doing enough to make the working environment safer. His statement comes after the death of 4 miners there. They were trapped underground following seismic activity at the weekend. Zwane was speaking after meeting with management and unions at the mine on Monday. Now, although what happened at Taulekwa was an act of God, the question we pose is how safe are South African mines? To find out, we are joined by Nicholas Veltman from Hogan Lovells. He deals primarily with issues relating to mining law, construction and engineering. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Nicholas, first and foremostly, what do you make of what the Minister had to say about the mine, the Taulekwa gold mine there, in relation to safety of the mine, and not just that mine, but in general?
I think it is the first place for the Minister to go, is to look to the employer and to require the employer to do more. We are of the view that it could be extended. All stakeholders must be called in together to make this work.
How safe are South African mines?
We believe that they are safe. There are certain challenges that are prevalent at the mines, and we can discuss those. And in particular, at the moment, it's our economic struggle that we're in, which is resulting in retrenchments, employment insecurity, and the impact that has on the relevant crews that are underground, which will impact safety.
Compared to global standards and in previous years, how safe are we?
We are relatively safe. In South Africa, we are slightly different from other international mines in that we still have quite a high labour statistic. Certain mines, for example, in Australia, are highly mechanised. And so the safety there is slightly different. But because our employment in respect to those mines is high.
If we look at frequency in terms of mine accident, how frequent do we have these type of accidents in South Africa in relation to mines? And is that common?
From what we've seen, we're looking at probably an accident once a month or so, depending in which sector, mining sector it falls. And there's been a definite downtrend from about 2012 up until about 2015 in relation to fatal accidents. And obviously during 2016, 2017, that has kind of leveled out. And the question is, I suppose, why is that?
Talk to me about numbers in relation from 2012 to 2016. How do we compare? What was it before 2012 and what does it look like?
It's been a steady drop.
Steady?
Yeah.
Ballpark figure?
I don't have the figures with me at the moment.
Could we say 50% drop, perhaps?
I wouldn't say exactly 50, but yes, close on that.
Zero harm, is that even possible and achievable in South Africa?
We believe that it is obtainable and achievable. There are certain challenges that need to be overcome. For example, the mining rhythm in South Africa. That's very important from a health and safety perspective. When the government issues stoppages in respect of our mines, when employers start to retrench or put mines on care and maintenance, the mining rhythm is disrupted. And that places certain employees at risk. Their mind frame changes. Second challenge, for example, is the internalization of health and safety. And so the approach that is used and the attitude towards health and safety. When we talk about internalization, I can give you an example. You'll have a mine employee who will drive 80 kilometers an hour in a 60 zone when he's not on the mine. But as soon as he gets onto the mine, he drives at 60 k's an hour because there's a fear of being caught. Internalization from a health and safety perspective, he should be driving 60 k's an hour whether it's on or off the mine. So those are the challenges that we see, and the way that we believe zero harm can be achieved is getting all stakeholders together, understanding the situation that we're currently in, and appreciating that and taking measures to deal with those aspects.
What does achievable or zero harm actually mean? Does that mean accident on the mine, or just in terms of a person getting injured or a person dying on the mine?
So zero harm is exactly that. No harm, so no injuries, no fatalities on the mine.
Do mines take the issue of safety of their employees very seriously?
They do. We act for a number of mining houses, and they take health and safety extremely seriously. We'd even say, to the extent that if you compare them to other industries within South Africa, the level of health and safety systems implemented by these companies is extensive.
How extensive is or how are they being held accountable? Are they being held accountable by the Mine Health and Safety Council, or how do they deal with these issues?
They're being held accountable by the Mine Health and Safety Inspectorate of the Department of Mineral Resources. They are charged with ensuring that the employers comply with the Mine Health and Safety Act. And so there's various inspections that are conducted by the Inspectorate, and in certain instances, stoppage orders are issued for the mines to rectify certain deviations that they come across.
Now, we're also asking, of course, our viewers today if they are concerned about the safety of miners in the mining industry, and they're tweeting us quite frequently on this particular issue. Let's take a quick look at what you are telling us on the question that we posed to you, if you are concerned about miners in our mines. This one from Mikobi says, absolutely yes, but these big mining companies are careless about the miners' lives. This one from Rich Dad, Poor Kid says, it's the responsibility of mine bosses to make sure that the working place is safe for miners. We'll take a look at some more of those, but we're also talking about the sustainability of mines today, Nicholas. Talking about that, how sustainable is mining in South Africa as we stand?
The mining industry goes through cycles, and we've seen that before, where the mining industry dips and certain changes are needed for it to change. And we've seen that over the past 2 years, where there's been restructuring of certain of the large mining houses. Certain of the mining companies have to cut back, which unfortunately has resulted in certain retrenchments. We've seen a lot of disposals and acquisitions of mining right areas and mines throughout the process. So at the moment, we're in a restructuring phase, which I believe once we're through, it's going to be sustainable.
We've also seen the latest job losses. Another 2,600 workers are going to lose their jobs. What does that say about the industry?
The industry is cutting back. Where previously it was extensive in what it was able to do, they are tightening their belt, so to speak, and bringing it back down, restructuring, retrenchments, etc.
But why? Why are they cutting back? Why are they holding back on investing in this country where we are currently, we found ourselves in a technical recession, we have downgrades, they should actually upscale?
There's been a number of issues that have come up over the past number of years. Uncertainty in terms of our legislation, particularly in relation to the mineral laws, particularly in relation to the environmental laws. The case in point at the moment is the Mining Charter and its enforceability, where that's standing. The Minister has made various calls on that point. And, you know, the question even from a mining charter perspective is, if its implementation has been suspended at this point in time, how are we going to deal with new mining right applications, how are we going to deal with new prospecting right applications, transfer of mining rights in terms of Section 11, if that concern or that uncertainty about what is actually in place is still there.
So it's uncertainty, definitely. Finally, advice or perhaps safety tips that you can give to mines about safety, just briefly.
It's all about the health and safety culture and internalizing the health and safety rules, policies, and living according to the health and safety policies. Not just seeing it as a procedure that you don't want to be caught not complying with, but actually living according to those rules.
Nicholas, I thank you so much for your time and joining us here in studio. That was Nicholas Veltman from Hogan Lovells, who deals with mining law, construction and engineering. But we're also conducting a poll, of course, and we're checking with you while Nicholas is here. You can see the poll where we stand right now. Is mining becoming unsustainable in South Africa? 139 votes in, Nicholas, and as you can see there, 85% of South Africans, as well as people on the African continent, are suggesting that it's not sustainable anymore. Or it is unsustainable, rather. 15% says it is not unsustainable. Only 50. Let's take a quick look at what Katlego is telling us. I have the fear that in 100 years' time, mining will still exist. The minerals no longer available underground. And Nazim says someone is making it unsustainable because things are happening there. They're happening somewhere and somebody is making a buck. Well, let's take a look at what's happening on our Facebook page, what you're telling us there. The South African Medical Association, SAMA, says that any information within the doctor-patient relationship must be respected, even after death. SAMA was responding to the book, Mandela's Last Years, which details the last days of the late former President Nelson Mandela. And, of course, you also heard from his widow, Graça Mandela, that she will take legal action against that. Then the Nelson Mandela Foundation spokesperson, Selo Hatang, has welcomed the publisher Penguin Random's decision to pull the book off the shelves about the late former President Nelson Mandela. And finally, the media fraternity has praised government communicator Ronnie Momwepa for his professionalism and dedication. Journalists have been camping outside Mwepa's home in Centurion since his passing over the weekend. And a true gentleman. And rest in peace, Ronnie, and our condolences from the SABC to your family. You can find all of these on our Facebook page. Go there and find more. Let's now take a quick look at some of the front pages from around the globe. And we start off in New York, the big city, Big Apple. The New York Times reports that Jared Kushner said that his meetings last year with the Russians were not part of any attempt by Moscow to disrupt the presidential election. Remember, he's connected to Donald Trump, son-in-law. Moving to China, the South China Morning Post says that China yesterday issued its strongest warning yet to India over their month-long border dispute, saying that Beijing would protect its sovereignty at all cost. And finally, in Israel, the Jerusalem Post reports that the staff of Israel's embassy in Jordan, including a security guard involved in the shooting incident in which 2 Jordanians were killed, returned to Israel from Amman yesterday. Those are some of the newspapers from around the globe, but let's throw it forward and take a look at what's happening tomorrow. We will be shining the spotlight on mental illness. Yes? Are you well? That's the question. Take a look at it tomorrow. But will we do that tomorrow? That's another question. I must just double check on that topic that we're going to focus on. But let's take a quick break. We'll be back after that.
He's still going. He pops it up with Sergio Peterson. Easy as that. What a response it is from the Cheetahs. Brilliant score.
Imran Tahir produced a superb performance with the ball. The Proteas leg spinner put his side in the driving seat, scalping 3 wickets for just 18 runs.
Gifton Gope is flying toward third, and he is there with a triple, his first in the big leagues.
It is a Ferrari front row lockout, unless Hamilton can get on pole, and he can't. Ferrari, for the first time since France in 2008, have locked out the front row.
For all your sports news, keep it locked to Sports Live every Saturday and Sunday from 20:30.
Welcome back to Newsroom. Very good morning to you. If you have just joined us, yes, you've been listening to, our look at mining this morning. And, of course, unions, they've come out guns blazing yesterday after 4 people died in the Taolekwa gold mine disaster in Orkney, Northwest Province. Now, Mineral Resources Minister Mosebenzi Zwane, you saw him a little bit earlier, criticising mining companies for not doing enough to make the working environment safer for miners. How safe are South African mines? You've heard. The experts say it's quite safe. And do mining companies take the issue of safety seriously? To talk to us about this from a different perspective, we are joined by the NUM's Head of Safety, Mr. Eric Telitshana. Very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, sir, and the listeners.
Yes, our viewers are very interested in this. They're tweeting us and they're telling us that they don't think the mines are that safe in South Africa. I want to ask you, you're the man right at the coalface of safety. Firstly, let's start with Taolekwa, this disaster there, 4 lives lost. How do you view this? What do you make of the disaster that happened in Orkney?
First of all, as National Miners, we are passing our condolences to the families of the deceased. It's unfortunate that they have lost their lives in the line of duty, producing for their families and for the economy of this country. One, the National Union of Mine Workers is disturbed, as we indicated in our media release, that this accident, like any other accident, could have been prevented. We believe that, to us, there are rumors that came from our members that this area was identified as a special area whereby the rock engineer had to visit the area last week, Wednesday, where he made his own observations and made recommendations. We are saying that these are allegations that still need to be tested, and he recommended how this area should be mined, given a special attention.
So it's on the record that this is a very difficult mine, or a very difficult place to mine, as it were.
Yes, yes.
That's very interesting. I want to move on and talk about mine safety in general here in South Africa. Let's start with the mining companies. Are mining companies, are they serious about the issue of safety of our miners? Are they serious about this? Are they passionate about this?
Well, you know, what comes first to most of the mines, you know that it's about making profits, making money. What we are pushing as NUM is to say that they must not push to make profits before the lives of people. Mine workers' lives are most important. They must prioritize the lives of those workers. We believe that a safe mine is a productive mine. Measures must be put in place to prevent and protect lives of the workers, so that workers must not be exposed either to dangerous rocks, machinery, and also to the dust that is causing silicosis.
Profits before people is the problem, you say? Profits before people is the problem?
We say that the profits before people is a problem. That is why that we're saying that mine workers must be valued also, not only the profits. Even the director who's sitting in London or wherever, that director, if he's getting shares from the bloody gold or platinum, he's also responsible for the death of that particular worker. What we are saying again is that, you know, the mining industry can be made safe through interventions, investing more on safety. Through the Mining Safety Council, as a tripartite body, we have been engaging, we have done a lot of research which can be used as part of intervention to save lives in the mining sector. We have called also upon the CEOs. Last year, I think it was on the 12th of August, where we sat down with the CEOs to say, CEOs, it can't be right that every time we have got widows as a result of the mining industry. As long as we continue to have widows as a result of the mining industry, we can't say it is safe until there's no harm and there's no person who dies as a result of the mining operation.
Let's move away from the safety, but of course sustainability is the other thing, and that's part of the discussions that's going on right now. The capitalists, they tell us, oh, mining is becoming unsustainable in South Africa. What do you say to the capitalists who are saying mining is becoming unsustainable?
Now, you know, always when there are changes in the country, you will always have these problems. Remember, around 1996, there was a gold crisis. You know, it was a movement from the apartheid government to the democratic state. You know, it was just moving from that. Again, 1996, you know, we had to take up our campaign as NUM. We move all to engage investors all over the country and say South African mines are not a sunset. It's not a sunset industry. It's a sunrise industry. That is the campaign that we took, and then to build investor confidence, and we were successful on that. Even now, yes, there have been a decline. If you remember, around the 1994, 1996, there were more than 600. There were more than 1 million workers in South African mines. Now there's a decline now. We have got just above 400,000 workers that are employed in the mining industry, which is a point for concern. You know why? We always say that, you know, there's a ratio that normally the capitalists do. 1, 2, 3. This 1, 2, 3 means you must, in terms of your production, it talks to the production levels. You must produce with half labor and triple the profits.
Yeah, that's always the scenario. It's profits.
scenario.
That's what they say the investors want. The investors want profits, otherwise they're not going to invest. It's like an axe hanging over the head of mining constantly, is that you must make the shareholders happy. The question, or the thing that they're putting forward, is they're saying things like, oh, labor is too expensive in South Africa in the mining sector, and the labor force wants more money. What do you say to capital when they push that kind of story?
You know, it's surprising because if you look on the labor rates in South Africa compared to other countries, where most of the very same mining houses are operating, it's pretty high than the here in South Africa. We are here getting lesser than what they are giving out in other countries. Therefore, it can be said that South African labor is more expensive, because if it is possible to other countries, why not in South Africa? You know, that takes us back to the days of discrimination.
Yeah.
Is it because more people who are working in the underground here are black people?
Are the mining companies, the investors, the capitalists, are they holding the workers to ransom with these kind of sentiments around expensive labor, around investment is not coming in and the outlook is bleak for mining and so forth, that there are other places in the world where it is more affordable and better for investors to go and look to invest in mines? Is that something that is holding a bargaining tool against the workers that should be resolved?
Yes, I think that sitting around the table and discussing these issues, we can be able to resolve these issues. We have been able to resolve very, very critical issues in the country. We can still do, but the issue of holding, as I said, that when there are changes right now, there's a call for the mining charter. Again, there's a threats of retrenchments. Anglo-Gold Ashande is talking about 8,500 plus contractors, which takes us to 10,000. There are a number of houses that are sensing about retrenchments.
Yes.
We believe that there's panic when there are changes. That panic goes back to ordinary worker on the call phase, because workers are told, now you are going to retrench. No, there's uncertainty now. Worker doesn't know whether he's still going or she is going to still work longer for this particular mine.
What do the workers want? You see, we know there's change coming now. There's change is coming in the mining sector in South Africa, whether we like it or not. Changes need to come. The workers, what do they want the mining sector to look like in 5 or even 10 years' time from now?
One, in terms of health and safety, the workers would like to see that mining environment to be like Sun City tomorrow. So where they
like Sun City?
Yes, where they can go there without any fear that they will not come without...
for their lives.
No, they may come... So that when they come out from underground, they feel like anybody who was in Sun City, in any other office.
Yes.
Because they feel free.
Yes.
They don't get scared. Again, the other issue is that there are laws, there's a Mining Safety Act that is guiding us on how to work in the mining environment. We have to, the employers have to make sure that that law is implemented. Also, ourselves as trade unions, we must make sure that there's enforcement by the Department of Mineral Resources. We must monitor the implementation of these laws.
Do the workers trust the employers in the mining sector?
You know, I can say yes and no, because in some circumstances, they will promise and they will deliver. But in some cases, they won't promise, but they won't deliver.
It's a problem. Mr. Qilichana, thank you very much for joining us. The head of safety with NUM is Mr. Eric Qilichana, talking to us today about safety in the mine, but also we talk about sustainability. And is there a trust deficit between the workers and management in the mining sector? And what does the future hold? Very interesting views. Thank you very much for joining us today, sir. Now, we'll take a short little break. When I come back, we'll take all those tweets that you guys have sent us in around Athletics South Africa and looking after young athletes. Yes, we've got a golden generation coming through. How are we going to make sure that they become world beaters? Yes, now is the time for us to put those measures in place. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back shortly.
Do you have a funeral policy?
Making someone's dreams come true is not always as simple as saying yes. But AVBOB's cashback funeral plan not only provides funeral insurance for your family, but also helps you to say yes to life's little extras. Because for every 5 claim-free years, you'll get an entire year's premiums based on your monthly premium value, paid back in cash. SMS Duduza to 41790 and we'll call you. AVBOB, we're here for you.
If you want AVBOB to contact you, SMS Duduza and your name to 41790.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Very good morning to you. Athletics South Africa, they've named a 24-member team for the World Champs in London. That starts next week, Friday. But the athletes are blasting it for what they call unfair selection criteria. Most of the complaints were around the fact that ASA left out sprinters who could have competed in the 4x100 meters relay event, as well as promising athletes who could have gained valuable experience. Now, we've seen the tweets of Wade van Niekerk and Akani Simbine. They're not happy about the state of affairs.
They're not happy about the state of affairs, and it's been coming for some time. Akani Simbine feels like ASA has dropped the ball again. Wade van Niekerk says he can't believe that once again we can't get it right as a nation, as a federation, to get the best athletes on board to be competing at the international level. And you know what, Evan, you said it a little earlier, a lot of the South African public is in agreement with them. Public as well as other senior athletes who believe that a lot more should and can be done by ASA to make sure that we always put our best foot forward, even going into the future.
We have a lot of tweets coming in. A lot of you guys are tweeting us because we're passionate about athletics here in South Africa, and it's one of the sports codes that haven't been managed very well over the last 20 years. We have to admit that. It's been scandal after scandal, and lots of money's gone missing. Let's take a look at some of the tweets you guys are telling us, because we've asked the question today around this. Jane Thuli.
Jane Thuli says, I see opportunities for young talent from big cities, rural areas, dollar support.
No support is what he's saying in the rural areas. Katlejo says they're not doing anything if they haven't come to the rurals and scout the talent in schools. We don't even have facilities here, but we have ASA. And that is kind of the sentiment, that we're having in South Africa. But Kendall, the fact of the matter is, right now, South Africa is on the verge of bringing through a golden generation of athletes.
Those under 18s, they proved themselves, they showed what amazing talent we've got in this country that nobody knew we had. We thought, a lot of people thought, oh yes, Wade van Niekerk, and then what's going to come after him? Yeah. Oh, then Akani came up, and Asucho Bodwana, Caster's always been there, a mainstay. But after them, nothing. Then all of a sudden, we go to Nairobi, we meet Brayton Poole.
Brayton Poole, yes, a young high jumper. He's going to be a champ, no doubt about that. The thing is, it's not just the likes of a Brayton Poole. We've got hurdlers, we've got sprinters. What impresses me is this golden generation of sprinters on the back of Wade, Akani, and Anaso is coming through. I'm worried that we are not going to manage these guys properly to make them world stars.
You know what the big thing is? The stars that we've got currently, they were not managed by ASA. The stars that we've got currently manage themselves. Their parents put in the time, their parents made the sacrifices, their schools made the sacrifices, their coaches, the individuals themselves have got themselves to where they are world beaters. It has had nothing, very little to do with ASA itself in terms of organizing their routines, organizing their schedules, making sure they get to the competitions in a way that's useful for their future. And that's literally what these youngsters are going to have to do unless ASA steps up and jacks its boots up.
Yeah, but this is simply not good. This is the world event where we got a South African beating the field by almost 50 meters. It shows the kind of talent that we have coming through. I was most impressed with our young sprinters at this event. Why do you think sprinting has suddenly taken such a step forward here in South Africa? Is it because of the weight factor? Could that be?
Look, I think you're a former athlete yourself, even, and you know a lot of it happens in your mind. You know a lot is in your brain, and if you get that extra edge, that self-belief, you will get over the line. You will beat the next person running next to you. And that's what weight has brought to South African sports, not just athletics. We saw what happened on the back of it. The Blitzbokke were doing extremely well. They carried on.
This is worrying. This is what Wade tweeted, right? And he says, wait, with a couple of worried emojis there. But South Africa has so much potential right now, and we're still having team selection doubts and conflicts. And Wade, that is at the heart of the problem, my friend. That is the conundrum that we are facing. Is it that there's no money in athletics South Africa?
It might well be. It might well be that the thinking is knee-jerk. The thinking is not for long term. And mind you, Wade van Niekerk, we've both spoken to Wade van Niekerk at different times, and Wade van Niekerk is a very measured fellow. And for him to say that is very interesting. Akani is very similar to him as well, and he's not too happy either.
He says it's all good and well when you want to groom talent, but when there's an opportunity to help the talent grow, you shut the door on them.
That says it all.
And do you shut the door because of money? And why don't you have money, and why don't we have sponsors in athletics? Now, fortunately or unfortunately, I worked in the dark days of athletics, which is in the 90s, when there were a couple of gentlemen, I can't mention their names now, because I believe that was the start of the mismanagement of athletics in South Africa. The sport has lost all its sponsors, there have been race conflicts and so forth. Are we going to see a time where we overcome this? Because if you look at this golden generation that's coming through, we cannot miss out.
No, we cannot, and I believe that we will. I think athletics is slightly different to the other team sports, where you have to build on a bigger team and so on and so forth. The money required and the organization required around athletics is different to what's required in cricket, rugby, or soccer. And I think that we can overcome these challenges. We can get Athletics South Africa to where it's actually as good as Jamaica's athletics, as good as the US and Canada and the UK. So absolutely.
We have the talent, Kendall, to emulate all of these countries. We have the raw talent coming through right now. We have to back them with money. That's what it costs. It costs money to develop athletes.
No, couldn't agree more.
Thank you very much for Kendall, for bringing this issue to light and always bringing us lovely talking points from the world of sport. We are Mzansi, a sporting nation founded on sport. Let's go to the weather now.
Oh, thank you very much. Let's see what's happening in the world of weather. High pressure cell and two cold fronts. Actually, the first one is weakening. This is the first one here, just ahead of over the central parts of the country, sort of the southern central parts. And then the second one just behind it is going to make landfall in Cape Town today. And with it, we're expecting up to 80% chance of rainfall, especially in the Cape Town area. In the surrounding areas, we've got 60 up to 30% along the southern coastline. In PE, we're expecting rainfall much later on in the day. But at first, we're expecting these strong winds coming from the interior, northwesterly winds blowing at about 50 kilometers per hour. Along the coastal areas, reaching about 60 kilometers per hour, especially in between PE and Eastland, and very strong winds ahead of that cold front. And over the interior, we're expecting those strong winds over the Northern Cape, the Eastern Cape, and parts of the Free State for today. And with that, we are expecting high fault fire danger conditions. So do be careful if you're in the central parts of the Northern Cape, parts of the Eastern Cape, and the parts of the Free State and Northern Cape province. Tomorrow, there's another high pressure cell coming from the ocean into the interior, dominating over the the Northern Cape province. In order to expecting clear skies with the high pressure, so clear skies over the Northern Cape. Otherwise, partly cloudy weather over the southern coastline as it brings in a lot of moisture along the south. And again, once again, for KZN coastline, we're expecting isolated showers for tomorrow. Otherwise, today we're expecting a clear sky day for most of KwaZulu-Natal. In the north, we're expecting isolated showers. Otherwise, places like Zambia, Zimbabwe, no rainfall for winter for them. So we've got clear skies. Your maximum temperatures today, and remember those clear skies over the central interior and those strong northwesterly winds into Komane, Dar and Uppington. The temperatures are warm in Uppington at 26. In places like Cape Town, we're expecting a high of 15 as that front makes its way along the southern coastline and over the interior. Cooling down temperatures even in PE for tomorrow. We're expecting even lower maximum temperatures. Today we're expecting 20, tomorrow even lower. Even places like Komane tomorrow will be even cooler. Durban will only see some partly cloudy conditions for today, and then much later on we're starting to see that cloudy weather as that front makes its way tomorrow. Remember, now coming towards Zimbabwe and the neighboring countries, you're seeing Botswana with a high of in Maun with 27, a bit cooler in the eastern parts. We're seeing Francistown and Gaborone at 24. Zimbabwe even cooler today. We're seeing 22 as a general maximum temperature, while in Beira we're seeing some isolated showers with a high of 25. Most of Namibia today, this morning, we had a lot of fog along the coastal areas, which you might not see tomorrow, but today we're expecting it just to start clearing. It is a bit cooler now, so it takes time for the fog to clear along the west coast. Otherwise, Walvis Bay peaking at 18. Generally, cooler conditions are expected in Namibia for today, which is different from what you may expect in Madagascar, where we're seeing partly cloudy weather with warm temperatures at 23 in Antananarivo. In the surrounding islands, we're seeing much warmer weather, seeing Moroni at 28, with Victoria peaking at 29 and some isolated showers expected, mainly in the afternoon. Moving towards the central parts of Africa, like I said, clear skies over the south, only isolated showers in the extreme northern parts, and most of the rain is here just outside these islands, here just outside the Cameroon and Libreville. I'll leave it here for the weather desk. Remember, you're watching Newsroom, so stay tuned to SABC News.
Meningitis is a potentially deadly disease that affects more than 1 million people worldwide each year.
Well, it's an infection of the lining of the brain and the spinal cord. And it's caused by a variety of bacteria.
And also, importantly, with fungal meningitis, there's no transmission from person to person.
In South Africa and elsewhere in the world, the ministries of health have recognized this as an important disease to prevent. And vaccines have been introduced into immunization, routine immunization programs.
It's really important to prevent, and the best way to prevent is to have people know their HIV status, start antiretroviral treatment as soon as possible.
For all your health news, join Health Talk every Saturday from 9 to 10.
I think winter is definitely one of those seasons where you can really show off your sartorial choices. You can start from a single layer of a shirt, actually starting with thermals, build it up with the shirts. You can have beautiful knits over the shirts, like we've done with Jay.
This film tells the story of a very, very significant political figure in the struggle for freedom in South Africa, who happened to be a woman. She was Nelson Mandela's wife.
The exhibition is an exploration into black femininity. Tabitha is a woman of color, and she is exploring the historical exploitation of the black female body.
Newtown Junction Mall hosted an epic contest in the cold where 3 top South African graffiti artists battled it out for the opportunity to become the Newtown Graffiti Face-Off Master.
For your weekly dose of entertainment news, tune into Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1. Take your evening one well informed with primetime news.
Thanks for tuning in. You're watching SABC News Prime. The burning land reform issue was also a point of discussion on the first day.
If you do not have a skills revolution, you will run into the kind of problems that we're having at the moment.
We funded about 466,000 students, out of about 800,000 students that are in the university system.
South Africa says insufficient electricity and water remains one of the biggest barriers to development and prosperity on the continent.
The top 4 batsmen in the squad, Hashim Amla, Quinton de Kock, Faf du Plessis and AB de Villiers, are certainties in the starting lineup.
I really believe we cover all bases when it comes to spin bowling, seam bowling, proper pace bowling, and an amazing batting lineup.
Stay tuned every Monday to Sunday from 6 p.m.
Welcome back every morning to you once again. I'm with Kendall Makamate. We try to straighten ourselves up for the next hour. Kendall, nice to be with you.
No, very good to be here. That athletics discussion, I think, is something that's going to go on all the way until we get to London Champs. Hopefully, we resolve it, though, before it gets too bad.
We need to expose our youngsters. That's all I'm saying. They're good enough. They show they're good enough. They need to be exposed. But that's not our key focus today. Of course, today we look at mining in general and safety in particular. The mineral resources, Monster Bensizwane, of course, he criticised mining companies yesterday for not doing enough to make the working environment safer for miners. So that's why we asked the question, Kendall.
Absolutely. We want to find out from you, are you concerned about the safety of miners in our country?
Yeah, we got more tweets coming in. This one comes from Migobi. He says to us, absolutely yes, but these big mining companies are careless about miners' lives.
Then Rich Dad's Poor Kid says it's a responsibility of mine bosses to make sure the working place is safe for miners.
Yeah, makes sense. Very simple. To the point. Of course, we asked the sustainability question also because that's what Capital tells us always, that mining's becoming unsustainable. It's too dangerous. There's investment's a problem, and most of all, labour is expensive. Of course, we've heard from the workers a little bit earlier what they say. But what do you think? That's our poll. Is mining, Kendall, becoming unsustainable?
Well, very interesting. There's always debates on either side of that particular question. 149 votes in. 82% say yes, it is becoming unsustainable in South Africa.
Wow, that's a big majority. At least, even if it's not the case, it's concerning that that's the public perception. That of 150 people, that would be the sentiment. But we've asked the mining companies if they would come in and talk about this, but they don't want to. So they don't really care what the public thinks by the looks of it. This is the tweet from Muli Malong.
He says mines would be sustainable as long as no one digs the hole to the ground.
I don't know what that means. Anyhow, Katlejo says, I have fear that in 100 years' time mining will still exist. The minerals no longer available underground. Yes, that's a concern for everyone. Our future cannot be under the ground in South Africa. Our future must be above the ground, in our hands and in the hands of our children. Kendall. And talking about our children, they're doing very well in the world of athletics.
Absolutely, and one of the reasons we're having this discussion, asking you this question today in the sports segment, is because of that. We want to find out from you, should Athletics South Africa do more to support young talent?
Yeah, we got lots of tweets in on this one. People are very passionate about this. This one from Jamila van der Skyf, who says they can encourage young talents to get more active, and if the youngsters feel confident, they might be able to partake in a tournament.
Nazim Purpum says we have a great young talented athletes here in South Africa. They need more support.
Great. We've just heard that Athletics South Africa wants to come and talk to us. They want to talk to us about this. We'll be very happy for them to come into studio tomorrow. We'll speak to our sports editor, and hopefully Athletics South Africa can come in and tell us what they think about what Wade is saying, what Kani Zimbini is saying. Absolutely. It's wonderful, isn't it, when people respond to you in real time.
Fantastic. Then we can actually get to the nub of the matter and actually get to resolution.
Well, we're going to do the headlines. After that, Kendall's going to speak to Athletics South Africa. And we're going to get them in tomorrow and find out what they say about the criticism from their own athletes with regards to support of young talent and the selection of the team for the World Cup. But first, let's do today's work. Here are your top stories. Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises is expected to convene in Parliament later today to investigate Eskom. The inquest into the death of anti-apartheid struggle stalwart Ahmed Timol continues today. And a man is to appear in court in relation to the shooting of two siblings in front of their own family in Alexandra, here in Johannesburg. Those are the headlines right now. Let's go over to Kendall to get us the sport.
Thank you very much, Evan. Good morning to you. This is what we've got planned for you in the sports today.
We've used a very high standard, high criteria to make sure that our athletes do not go there and be eliminated in the first round.
South Africa's senior athletes bemoan Athletic South Africa's selection criteria, which they say excludes future medal prospects from international exposure. The Proteas are looking forward to the return of star seamer Kagiso Rabada for the third test, as they look to get their noses in front of England in their 4-test series. And condolences pour in for the family of rugby legend Willie Lebomzonkotla, who succumbed to cancer at the age of 71. Of course, in this hour, I'll also be chatting to Thando Manana, former Springbok, on his book, Being a Black Springbok. But more about this a little later at 10:40. Do stay with Evan as we've got the news.
Yeah, Kendall, don't forget to go and get in contact with Athletic South Africa. They've just called. They want a right of reply. They want to talk about the selection of the team. And we will have them in studio tomorrow. Don't worry about that. I look forward to that interview because we have to support our young talent, the golden generation. They're coming through. And I'm glad that the bosses at Athletic South Africa are actually watching the Newsroom show. Great stuff. Now, this is your top story today at this hour. The Public Enterprises Committee is expected to convene in Parliament a little bit later today. Now, members of the committee are to be briefed by legal advisors on how to proceed with the Eskom investigation and who can legally be called or summoned to testify. Meanwhile, the DA, that's a Democratic Alliance, has welcomed the Public Protector's decision to investigate the Eskom board for what the party calls a multi-million rand golden handshake to former CEO Brian Molefe. The DA requested the investigation after it emerged that the board had approved a 30 million rand pension payout to Molefe after working for only 18 months as the CEO of the utility. The decision caused major public outrage. Molefe was later reinstated, but the Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown has since rescinded this decision. The inquest into the death of Ahmed Timol in 1971 continues today. In yesterday's explosive testimony, anti-apartheid activist Stephanie Kemp refuted apartheid security claims that SACP members were instructed to commit suicide rather than betray the party during interrogation.
Albert Timol's death at the then John Vorster police station. The magistrate in the 1972 inquest relied on a document that allegedly contained the suicide instruction. Stephanie Kemp, a London-based undercover agent for the SACP, dismissed this. She and Timol exchanged secret documents before he was arrested.
It just doesn't. I don't think we would have been that prescriptive to anybody. Most of the people in the group, except myself, had not been in detention. I don't think we would have told people this is what you must do.
Earlier, the inquest heard how sleep deprivation and torture were standard practice at John Vorster Square. Former police officer Francois Erasmus described how he and a fellow officer broke into the home of Dr. Neil Agard's parents in Somerset West. This in an attempt to try and make Agard's death in detention look like suicide. Matla Kokomani, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Former President Kgalema Motlanthe delivers the address at the Public Interest Law Gathering at the University of the Western Cape today. The gathering is an annual event that started in 2011. Now, it brings together public interest legal practitioners, law students, paralegals, societal movement leaders, and legal academics. Its aim is to serve as a focal point for professionals in the field to share and develop knowledge. Now, over the next few days, law experts will discuss issues of social and political challenges that the public interest legal profession are attempting to tackle here in South Africa. A suspect is expected to appear in court in connection with the gunning down of a 23 and 25-year-old siblings, Itumeleng and Tsepo Sefolo, in full view of their family. The suspect, whose identity has yet to be revealed, has allegedly been terrorizing the community in Alexandra Township, north of Johannesburg. The incident and the police handling of the matter prompted Police Minister Fikile Mbalula to visit the Alex police station, where he read them the riot act. Still here in Johannesburg, angry parents have disrupted classes over the appointment of what they call a black principal in a coloured area. Klipsveld West secondary school pupils were forced to miss the first day of the third term yesterday when angry parents barred them from class in a protest against the appointment of a black principal. The race row over this new appointment led to parents, mostly from the coloured area, locking the school gates and vowing to disrupt learning unless the Gauteng Department of Education rescinded this decision. Now, the school governing body says the racial tension was triggered by the community demanding the appointment of a coloured principal. The community claims there's a lack of representation in school leadership positions there. Time for us to take a little break now. We'll be back with more right after this.
Today on Rights and Recourse, we will unpack the new traditional court law.
The idea of the bill is not to overregulate, to basically set the principles.
The most important aspect of this bill is that it understands that customary law by its nature is consensual, that I have a right to affiliate, I have a right therefore to opt in, and I have a right to opt out.
The opt-out provision is basically one that you've got to respect the court in the sense of if you've been summoned, you've got to tell the clerk of the court at least that you're not willing to attend.
The challenge that I would like to throw to the Department of Justice, it has to come up with mechanisms of ensuring that people who exercise their right to opt out or to opt in are not in any way victimized.
Hashtag Rights with Dumila Mates on legal issues every Sunday at 2 o'clock Central African Time.
Phones, cloud systems and robots have taken over a lot of what used to be done manually.
Our accounting system is actually based on the cloud.
Google nowadays can tell you where you parked your car.
And Africa's entrepreneurs are using technology to create.
With Pocket Masipala, you can basically do all the services that you would do at the municipality physically by going there, but you can now do them on a mobile app.
Join me, Phumelele Zondi, on Sundays at 9 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back here with Newsroom on SABC News. Now, last Friday was the 50th anniversary of the passing of Africa's first Nobel Peace Prize laureate and one of the country's most respected leaders and stalwarts of the struggle, Chief Albert Luthuli. Now, at the commemoration, an emotional Dr. Albertina Luthuli, daughter of Chief Luthuli, called for an inquest to investigate her father's death. She said the recent opening of the inquest into the death of the anti-apartheid stalwart Ahmed Timol gave the family some hope that they could also finally get an opportunity to have her father's mysterious death reopened. Now, to talk about the life and times as well as the death of Chief Albert Luthuli, we are now joined by Jabulani Sithole, who is the chair of the Luthuli Museum in KwaZulu-Natal. A very good morning to you, Mr. Sithole. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning, good morning.
Now, Mr. Sithole, just give us your view on the commemoration that took place last week, Friday. The museum, are you happy with how this commemoration proceeded?
No, I'm quite happy with how it proceeded last Friday because, I mean, we were at the center of actually planning in conjunction with other stakeholders of this 50th anniversary of the passing of Chief Albert Luthuli. So we were quite satisfied.
For the sake of the younger generation, Mr. Sithole, tell us, who was Chief Albert Luthuli?
Chief Luthuli was the President General, one of the longest serving President Generals of the African National Congress from 1952 to 1967. As you said earlier on, he was the first Nobel Peace Prize laureate outside of Europe and the Americas. But much more importantly, he's actually remembered for having been one of the people who emphasized the life of service to humanity, if you like. The one remarkable thing that we often reflect on is the fact that when he was called upon to resign as a lecturer at Adams College, where he was training teachers in the 1930s to become a leader of his community, at the time he was actually invited to be a chief of a mission reserve. In that instance, what was unique about it is that you were elected into a position, you ran against other people. After resisting the invitation, he ultimately sacrificed, if you like, by resigning from a position that gave the family an income to come and serve humanity, if you like. But much more importantly, these days we talk about a number of values that are enshrined in our Constitution. One, for instance, the issue of the human dignity, of equality before the law, the non-sexist sort of society where women are recognized as equals. And all of these sort of values were values that shot to the prominence in the 1950s under the leadership of Chief Albert Luthuli. So he's remembered for all of those things. But much more importantly, if you talk about non-racialism, he demonstrated this kind of leadership that appealed beyond just the African National Congress. I've had discussions with people who are associated with the Liberal Party, for instance. Some of them go to a point of saying they would have been delighted if Luthuli was in their ranks, because what he represented embodied this non-racialism where all races were seen as equal and where humanity was going to be given this sort of human beings, equality, human dignity, freedom, and all of those things. So he's remembered for those sort of things at the time.
Now, Mr. Sithole, we are about to go live to the Ahmed Timol inquest. Of course, we all know about this one. But at the same commemoration we are talking about, Dr. Albertina Luthuli, the daughter of Chief Luthuli, called for an inquest to investigate her father's death. Please tell us a little bit more about this and tell us about the circumstances around his death at the time.
The family, like all families of people who died during the apartheid period, would like to actually have closure. Because you would recall at the time when Chief Luthuli died in '67, the apartheid state, through the inquest that was held at the time, that the family regards more as a cover-up, said he died in an accident. And they came up with all sorts of excuses, saying that he was ill at the time, he couldn't hear properly. Now, people who lived with him, family members in particular, and many other very prominent personalities who were living around the time, have actually testified that that was not the case, and they do feel that he was actually killed. If you like, they had actually imposed a lot of your banning orders on Chief Luthuli throughout the 1950s. But in 1966, something that tends to be quite remarkable, the candidate for the presidency in the United States, Senator Kennedy, actually defied the apartheid state and went over to Groundville to meet Chief Albert Luthuli against the wishes of the apartheid state. Now, that in itself actually made the family feel that despite all efforts that the apartheid state were having, they could not really silence him. And they have a reason to believe that he was killed. But the story that has been covered in the narrative that was given by the apartheid state is that he was run over by a train. But if you look at the injuries, and it has actually come out in a number of publications and a number of testimonies, they say the injury on his head looked more like something sharp that had actually stabbed him. But they've been struggling to actually have the state current government, the post-apartheid government, look into reopening the case. But efforts are underway at the moment to follow the same example as the Ahmed Timol family, where the same set of investigators have been approached with the possibility of helping the family conduct a fresh investigation and see if there is new evidence, even evidence that was not even considered at the time, that could really be a basis for this case to be reopened so that the family can have some closure as well.
Now, if we can wrap up this discussion around Chief Luthuli, if we look at South Africa of today, how do you think Chief Luthuli would view, firstly, the South Africa of today, and secondly, the ANC of today? What do you think?
I think two things. You would actually be happy with what we have put down as the Constitution. The values that he upheld are enshrined in our Constitution. But obviously, as a leader who was placing the people at the center of all the activities that we are involved in, you'd actually be raising quite a number of things, I mean, about what we can do better. What we can do better, for instance, if you talk about allegations and all these accusations of corruption, there is no doubt that Chief Luthuli would also be questioned that again and again, and actually calling upon the ANC to uphold that high moral ground where they can actually ensure that they rally the people and people have confidence in them, in that they can actually change their lives for the better. So there would be a mixture, on the one hand, happiness with what we have actually accomplished since 1994, but at the same time, call for us to do better than what we are doing at the moment.
Mr. Sitolia, thank you very much for coming in today and making this contribution. Making this contribution after the 50th anniversary of the passing of Africa's first Nobel Peace Laureate. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
That of course, is Mr. Jabulani Sithole. He's the chair of the Luthuli Museum down in Durban in KwaZulu-Natal. Of course, the inquest that's underway right now, that's into the death of anti-apartheid activist Ahmed Timol. He died at the John Foster Square police station, that is, in 1971. Some say he was thrown out of a 10th floor window. Let's go to the High Court in Pretoria now live.
At that time were completely segregated into a European and a non-European service, and I worked on both. When I returned from the United Kingdom in 1984, the ambulance service was, to my memory, unified, but I also took over as academic head of ambulance training for the province of the Transvaal. The difference between the 1960s and 70s is that ambulance personnel were essentially ambulance drivers, and I'll come back to that. By 1984, the Transvaal Ambulance Training College had been established. The concept of paramedic had not yet been developed, so there was a degree of ambulance training even in 1984, and that's 13 years later, which recognized that ambulance personnel were not people wearing a white coat with very limited training. And the paramedic training became available in the late 1980s, much later. So at the time of this incident taking place, ambulance services had very poorly equipped ambulances. Ambulance personnel had, at best, an advanced first aid certificate. There was really very limited training beyond that. And my understanding of police officers is that they had first aid, but at a much more basic level. And maybe as a generalization, the most basic levels of first aid are taught, or were taught, throughout the gold mining industry to all underground miners. The ambulance personnel had a more advanced level, and the police were somewhere in between. And so the ambulances at that time were almost not equipped apart with stretchers and blankets, certainly not with drips. and the expertise of the ambulance personnel or the police in terms of what we think of today was not even dreamt of. It was very limited indeed. So that is the sort of background as to what pertained at the time, and what I then, as a very junior ambulance officer, had at my disposal during the time that I was at medical school but working part-time in an ambulance service. So as a preface, those are the conditions. The first aid at the time, and it really was developed over years from the British particularly, the first aid at the time recognized that people could be severely injured, and specifically recognized the danger of neck injury, so that if somebody had fallen or been hit by a car, there was a very high risk of neck injury. And the recommendation from both the military and civil emergency care books at the time was that a patient, if they had been badly injured, should not be moved. They should be turned into what was called the coma position, which essentially meant lying on the side, almost using the hard surface of the road or whatever it was as a stabilizing surface. One knee was drawn up, so they were, in this particular situation, there was one leg was broken. Patient would have or should have been rolled to the other side, one leg drawn up, the knee bent, and the patient left lying in what was called the three-quarter position, lying on their side until emergency help arrived, and that included an ambulance stretcher. They were put onto that and transported to hospital.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, one of the reasons why we believe this evidence is very important is because over the years the family have had great concern that the manner in which Timol was handled, physically handled at that time, could very well have worsened his particular condition. The police in question were aware that Mr. Timol had fallen 10 stories, and presumably would have known that anybody falling 10 stories would be critically hurt. In your view, would moving a person, any person in that position, render considerable or any harm, further harm to the injured person?
Lord, any sort of movement of a critically injured patient, even at that time, was recognized as causing more severe injuries. Clearly, no one had the details on the post-mortem at that time. Equally, I have no knowledge of the surface onto which the deceased fell. But at that time, the police, in fact, certainly the provincial police and mostly the South African Police Service, didn't even carry first aid kits in their vehicles. And one of the things that we had, both as students and doctors, was we were told repeatedly, even if the patient is in the middle lane of the newly opened M1 motorway, they must stay there. They must not be moved because far more damage will occur. And we had situations where roadside tow trucks helped us to tow the vehicle out of the middle lane of the highway before the person was removed from the vehicle, or if they were lying on the highway, assisted us to move them out of the source of danger. So across the emergency services, including traffic police, and I assume the South African police as it was drummed in, you do not move these patients because you may cause further injury, particularly to the spine. particularly also if there are broken bones, big broken bones, and the deceased did have what would have been very visible, I think, a big damage to his one leg, with a break in his leg. The teaching was you had to split that before moving it. So I would recommend that this patient should not have been moved until emergency services arrived, but I have no knowledge of the availability of emergency services at that time.
You say that you could exacerbate the injury, but would you say that it would be fatal to move a person who's injured? Can it result in death?
My Lord, the normal cause of death in patients such as this is either they obstruct their airway, they're actually unable to breathe, typically seen in somebody with very bad facial injuries or bad neck injuries, or they are actually unable to breathe because the lungs are not working, or they bleed until they die, or they have such a severe brain injury that after a while the brain stops working. And any factor which can make this worse, this is why the three-quarter position has been advocated. It allowed the airway to be open. It allowed the maximum choice of being able to breathe. And more importantly, the not moving of the patient meant that whatever breaks there were would not cause further damage to the tissues around them by moving those breaks and increasing the amount of bleeding that the patient had. So the restriction in movement would have been planned as reducing the factors that would increase the onset of death. So they would not of themselves have been the only cause of death, but they could have made the other causes worse.
It could be a contributing factor.
Correct.
Was there any mention of that in the reports that you studied from Dr. Skeppers or Dr. Kemp? Did you find any discussion on this subject?
Dr. Kemp purely certified that the patient was dead, so there was nothing to add there. Dr. Skeppers had a very comprehensive, in my opinion, post-mortem for the time, and he documented neck injuries, he documented other spinal injuries, he documented internal injuries, all of which could have bled quite a lot, and I have no doubt contributed both to the onset of death. But on top of that, he documented two major bony injuries of the arm, the upper arm, the humerus, and of the femur. And moving a patient in a blanket rather than on a stretcher would have moved those fractures, and I think would have increased the amount of bleeding from the fractures and contributed to the death.
And did you have sight of Dr. Glackman's report?
I have not.
You only looked at the Dr. Skeppers report?
I have.
And from that report and the injuries he explained there, would you then conclude that it's possible, it's a possibility that the nature of the injuries were such that if the body would be removed or moved from the position it was, that might contribute towards the death of the patient? Would you say that, based on your knowledge?
My Lord, based on the post-mortem findings and the severity of brain injury sustained by the impact, I think that the eventual outcome would have been fatal come what may. But that was not known at the time.
Yes.
So my opinion is that the movement would have contributed to a more rapid cause of death.
Okay. You may proceed.
Your Lordship, I should advise you that unfortunately the Dr. Gluckman report is part of the earlier part of the record, which is still missing, and we're still searching for that part of the record.
I tried to look at the documents that were before me, I couldn't find it, and it puts us at a rather difficult position. But you may proceed.
Just also for your Lordship's knowledge, we do have the testimony of Dr. Gluckman as part of the transcript, but I can tell you that he doesn't deal with this aspect. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Professor, while we're dealing with what ought to have happened or not happened at the impact site, can I put to you from a layperson's perspective what I think should have happened, and you can either agree and perhaps elaborate, where there's a potential spinal injury, one should immediately stop the head or neck from moving to prevent further damage. Would you agree with that assertion?
Particularly when you're falling from a height, unless you have any other evidence, when you fall from a height, particularly if you fall on your feet, that may not have been the case here, but again, that was not known at the time. The whole force of landing works axially. The force is applied, for example, to the feet, and the shock of landing goes through the spine from the bottom to the top. And then when you fall over, often you then hit your head hard on the road. So not only is there a very high risk of injury to the neck, because the head moves independently of the torso and the neck itself can be damaged, as in fact turned out in this case. But in addition to that, the axial compression, think of a whole lot of teacups stacked up. That's the spinal cord. And if you drop those teacups as a column onto a hard surface, some of the teacups in the middle may break as well. And that, in fact, is also recorded in the post-mortem. We assume this in any fall from a height. So even in the first aid books, not only is the neck protected, but the recommendation is the patient should not be picked up by the arms and by the legs, because the bits in between will bend, but the patient should be what is called body rolled. And that was known and practiced at that time, and we practiced it as ambulance personnel, and it was taught in the first aid book. So you didn't pick up and drag a person off. That's a little different in a military context, because obviously there is combat risk. But in a civilian context, they were picked up or rolled onto a board or onto a stretcher without moving the spine further. Not just the neck, but the whole spine.
And further, Professor, would it be advisable to grip each side of the head to support the head in a position so that the head, neck and spine are in a straight line?
That would be correct.
And then one would want to support the head until emergency services can take over, no matter how long it takes for those emergency services to arrive?
That is correct.
And then finally, one may want to open the airway in case the person is unresponsive. So it is as a matter of record on the police version that none of these things happened. Professor, you made reference in your evidence to injuries that Mr. Timol sustained to his neck and to his spine, in fact. And we also know from the post-mortem report that he also sustained severe head injuries. If you can recollect, can you describe those injuries and perhaps indicate to the court why in such injuries it would have been best not to have moved this particular man?
May I refer to the post-mortem report?
Yes. Let's have the PM.
My Lord, I'm referring to the post-mortem report by Dr. N.J. Skeepers, who is the senior government pathologist. I'm not sure of your bundle reference number.
My Lord, it's in volume B, I believe it's exhibit X. Is it XX? Okay, so volume B, exhibit X. In fact, it's described as a, yes, it's X, pages 48 to 59.
Volume B.
Yes.
I've just looked at X and I get something different there. I get Mohammed Khan.
It's a volume, Your Lordship, which has all the affidavits and exhibits in the original inquest.
I'm on that one here. I'll just have to go to the index here. Because
Can I take a copy, please?
XX1.
Stop it and take it. Stop it. Lord, we can give you a
yes,
copy if you
I have it.
You have it, okay.
It's XX1. It's not X. Yes.
Thanks, Professor. You may proceed.
My Lord, I'm not, for obvious reasons, going to go through this in detail, but I will pick up on a couple of the salient points, and with Your Lordship's permission, I'll report in English. I welcome if anyone feels that I'm not translating adequately. On page 50, uitwendige voorkoms van die lichaam, it reports on the external injuries, and the first line is that there is a fracture of the right elbow and a fracture of the mid-shaft of the right femur. These were the two external fractures. And certainly the elbow and the femur fracture, that is the upper leg, would have been quite visible, I think, in terms of distortion of the shape of the arm or the leg, especially the leg. Moving to page 51, under item 6, the schedel or the skull, the report from the third line reports there is a fracture of the base of the skull and a fracture of the posteriorly and the left orbital plateau and the ethmoids. In other words, the skull has a top, a sides, and a bottom, and that surrounds the brain. So this is the area under the brain, between the brain and the body itself. It's the thickest part of the skull, and to break it requires a very large amount of force. That's not totally relevant to the skull. It's what's in the skull that's important. In other words, if you see a fracture of the base of the skull, that implies that the brain has the potential for very great injury. And also under, I'm sorry, I misread, schedel is number 5. And then number 6, schedel inhoud, it reports widespread subarachnoid bleeding, especially on the inferior aspect of the left frontal and temporal areas. So again, the brain occupies the skull. We have this bad break under the brain, and bleeding within the brain and on the surface of the brain, primarily where that break was. Now that's the most protected part of the brain, and is also the area to some extent which governs your really important functions. That's the bit of the brain which tells you to breathe. That's the part of the brain which also maintains your blood pressure and pulse, and it's called the midbrain. And that was the area that was the most badly damaged. Moving on to number 7, there was a break of the nasal bones and underneath the eyes. That is also part of the way you breathe in air, so it can partly obstruct the way you are breathing your air. And under 8, there are further fractures of the upper jaw, which again can imply this patient may have breathing, particularly if there is bleeding inside the mouth or nose, and the person is lying on their back at any time. That blood accumulates at the back of the mouth and stops the breathing. So traditionally, we again roll the patient, if we can, onto the side so that the blood runs out of the mouth rather than into the lungs or blocks up the breathing. And even in those times, there were 2 techniques taught, which was a mouth sweep to remove any broken teeth and so on from the mouth, and sometimes something called the jaw thrust. When you are holding the head, if you put your thumbs at the back of the jaw and push it forward, it allows breathing to be easier. So that was also why advocate reported that one should hold the neck. The neck structures were reported as bleeding at the front of the neck, and that's important again from the point of view of breathing. Moving down, there are lots of other bruising in the lung cavity, and I'm now on page 52. There was about 230 mils of free blood on the left side of the lung. That's not enough to kill him. Also a tear in the right lung and so on. Those would eventually continue bleeding, but I don't think that they were a specific cause of death here. When we move to the abdominal cavity, just moving forward, please forgive me for a second. The abdominal cavity reported, and I may have to just go forward, that the renal artery had been torn off. In 56, then it makes just a comment that there is bleeding around the kidneys. That is halfway down under Nira on page 56. And I believe it was cannot locate it at the moment, but somewhere there was a mention of the renal artery on the right being torn. And blood around it.
The last page, he mentions the artery there. on the last page, just before, above his signature. Could it be the one that you're looking for?
The left carotid artery shows an area of tearing in the elastic of the elastic vessels. That's not what I was referring to. That's still up in the neck. So there was, I think, significant neck injury, as has been documented. But
Professor, can I refer you to something in particular? This is, it's one of the annexes to the post-mortem report titled Lees Waarnemings. So it's one, I think it's the very last annex to the PM report. I beg your pardon, the second last annex. And could you comment on paragraph 27? That would be on page 55. And perhaps I'll translate.
Okay.
It's titled Spine, and then paragraph 27 says, spinal column, there is a fracture of the body of the 7th cervical vertebrae. And 28 spinal cord, it simply says not exposed. Could you comment for the court on those two paragraphs?
There is a fracture of the 7th cervical vertebrae. Now, the head is attached to the torso by the so-called cervical vertebrae, which start underneath the skull and finish with the thoracic vertebra. There are 7. So the 7th vertebra is the bottommost one. It's also the most vulnerable because when there is an injury, the head, if it moves, most of the load of that is actually placed on the 7th vertebra. And the 6th and the 7th vertebra are typically the vertebra that break either in a fall or in a bad rugby tackle and render the rest of the body without a spinal cord, so quadriplegic, tetraplegic. So the 7th vertebra, if it has a fracture, is a major fracture with potential major complications going with it. And that could include permanent spinal injury.
Professor, I think you've demonstrated to us that Mr. Timol had sustained very serious injuries to his spine, his neck, as well as his skull, as well as other injuries. So unless there's anything else in the post-mortem report you want to point us to, are you of the considered view that given the peculiar injuries that Mr. Timol suffered, that he should not have been moved from the spot he landed in, and the measures that you have described, emergency measures, should have been taken at that time? Unless
there were circumstances placing his life at further risk, for example, in the middle lane of an uncontrolled motorway, my opinion is that he should not have been moved until he was transported to hospital.
Thank you. And then finally, the example that you gave of police not wanting to move seriously injured persons even on a busy highway, it suggests that there was perhaps a fear or a culture amongst the police at the time that even in a dire situation as a busy highway, there was some reluctance to move injured persons. So in your view, if that culture persisted and you were aware of that culture at the time, were you surprised then to hear that fairly experienced police officers decided to move Mr. Timol almost immediately, notwithstanding their knowledge that this man had fallen 10 stories?
During the time that I worked within the ambulance service, a very senior police officer expressed to me the anxiety in the uniformed South African police that if police officers attempted to administer medical care, including first aid, to anybody, they might be held liable for doing so. In those days, there were no first aid kits on police vehicles, to my knowledge. And the police, for the same reason, expressed a wish not to move patients from the site of their injury, again because they might be held liable for further injuries that occurred. So I'm very surprised that they would have moved this patient, especially in urban metropolitan Johannesburg, Commissioner Street area, because there was availability of ambulance services at that time, and they were based in central Johannesburg. So the ambulances should have been available reasonably quickly.
And in fact, the impact site was located in a garden just outside the southern wing, which fronted onto a road where an ambulance could easily have stopped in order to attend to the injured Timol and take him to hospital. Does that add to your surprise?
It does.
Anything else? No further questions, Your Lordship.
Thank you, my Lord. Professor Albert, I'm just on a different tack here. If you were to certify the person dead, how would you go about to discern that the person is dead? What would you do? What would be of significance in a situation like that?
Thank you. And my question, I presume, refers to were a medical practitioner have to certify death?
Yes, the district surgeon. Say, for instance, you were the district surgeon and you were to certify the person dead. What would you do, and what would be of significance then?
There are a number of tests for life and separate tests for brain death, which is more relevant to transplantation. But the circumstances you are referring to here, I would look for external signs of life, in other words, any movement, any attempt to breathe at all. Then I would look at measuring the basic parameters of life, and that is, again, are there any attempts to breathe? Is there a pulse present? Because if there's a pulse present, then the heart is still beating and the person is still alive. And also any reflexes. Reflexes are a response to basic functions, not higher brain functions. So that if you're in a doctor's consulting room and the doctor taps your knee and the knee moves, you're not moving the knee, it's a basic spinal function. Equally, if you shine a light into the eye, the pupil gets smaller. So a patient who was making no attempt to breathe at all, and I'm taking 1971, there are other tests now, no attempt to breathe at all, no pulses palpable at all, and shining light in the eye, the pupil is widely dilated and not responding. That would have been what was used to ascertain the cause of death.
The reason I'm asking you, if we look at the original inquest Exhibit T, my Lord, that would be Volume B, Exhibit T, and that would be page 44, is an affidavit by Dr. Kemp, and I want to read it to you because I want to ask you to comment on some of the matters. Wanneer Dennis Kemp verklaar, ek is die distriksgeneesheer te Johannesburg. Op 27/10/1971 omstreeks 3:55 het ek 'n berig ontvang as gevolg waarvan ek na John Foster Plein gegaan het. Met my aankoms daar om 4:05 namiddag het ek na die veiligheidskantoor op die 9de vloer gegaan, waar die liggaam van 'n Indeerman aan my uitgewys was. Met die ondersoek het ek vasgestel dat hy reeds dood was. And then the interesting part to me, and that's why I'm questioning you on this, hy was pas dood. How would you ascertain that the person died just before that?
Let's now first take a break from the Ahmed Timol inquest. We now go live to the Public Enterprise Committee, who is convening in Parliament at the moment, where members of the committee are to be briefed by the legal advisors on how to proceed with the Eskom investigation and who can legally be called or summoned to testify. Let's go there live.
Is getting emptier and emptier, and there's not going to be enough resources to service all the people of South Africa if we do not make a plan at this stage. Chair and honourable members, our report, No Room to Hide, a Present Court in the Act, was prepared over a time of about 4 or 5 weeks after we received the so-called leaked mails, and that gave a lot of evidence to investigations that we were already busy with. After the completion of the report, we handed it over on the 28th of June to the Speaker of Parliament, also to the Chief Whips of all the political parties represented in Parliament. We handed copies to the Minister of Police, the Public Protector, the National Prosecuting Authority, the Hawks, also the National Executive Council of the ruling party, and we published it on our website for everybody to see and for everybody to read. What I'm going to do today is only going to touch on a few of the matters that's important to this committee regarding Eskom. If we look at the report, there is a few individuals, entities that's reported on with evidence in this regarding Eskom in the report. I'm going to start off, if you can just give me 1 second here. You will see that there is certain individuals that is in the report. Then there will be individuals that's not in the report itself. We are busy doing more investigations. We received a lot of information from whistleblowers, from other parties that I've mentioned before. And we are compiling a second report, as this is something that we really take care to do, not to rush it, and to make sure of our facts. Then, after I've reported back on these individuals, Mr. Blom will report back on Eskom, the Brian Molefe pension situation, also Trillion, and the current or the financials that were published a few days ago. If we carry on to the next slide, the first person that's very important and that we came across, especially in the mails, is Mr. Anuj Singh. Previously, Mr. Singh was the CFO of Transnet from July 2012 until August 2015. In August 2015, he was appointed by Minister Lynn Brown as the CFO of Eskom. There's a clear relationship between the Gupta family and Mr. Singh dating back to 2012 already. What we have found, evidence that we have found regarding this relationship, is that the Gupta family funded certain trips for Mr. Singh to Dubai. You will see there the 6th to the 9th of June 2014, where he stayed in the Oberoi Hotel in Dubai. In brackets there, the whole report and the annexures, like I said, is on our website. And in brackets there is the referral to the specific piece of evidence in our report. Anybody is welcome to go. It is a pile of paper, and I didn't want to bring everybody a copy of that. We could not afford the excess weight flying it down from Gauteng to here. But it is available, and everybody can have a look at that. Now, this trip, you will see, was just 3 months after Transnet awarded the locomotives tender. From 7 to 12 August 2014, the same in the Oberoi Hotel in Dubai. There was a clear message, and this is the indication that the Gupta family paid for these trips, is from Mr. Ashu Shawa, the COO of Sahara, that handled a lot of business for the Gupta family, where he wrote to the hotel, please swipe the card for all charges. This trip was just before, if I remember correctly, Newtel was notified that they were a new preferred bidder for Transnet. Then on the next slide, the 7 to 9 November 2014, same Oberoi Hotel. This was just weeks after the award of the new TEL contract of worth 1.8 billion rand. There was 2 other trips as well, the 24th to the 26th of February 2015 and 13 to 15 June 2015. And then after the appointment of Mr. Singh as CFO of Eskom, there was a trip 17 to 24 December to Dubai, and this was just days after the Tegeta obtained the Optimum coal mine. If we go to the next slide, there's another individual that can be connected to Eskom, as well as a very important member of the Department of Public Enterprises, Mr. Richard Seleke. Now, Mr. Seleke is the current Director General of the Department of Public Enterprises. Something to note is that the appointment of a DG vests exclusively in the President. Just a bit of background on Mr. Seleke. He was previously also a non-executive director on the Transnet board. And he started off his public service career in the Free State under current Minister Mosebenzi Zwane. Now, in the mails, there was a very prominent person who wrote a lot of mails, or who received and transferred a lot of mails. And this with the email address infoportal1@zoho.com with the screen name of Businessman. Now, Businessman sent his own CV to Mr. Duduzane Zuma on the 29th of June, and once again the annexes there in brackets you can refer to the annexes in the report itself. A few months after that CV that was sent, Mr. Seleke was appointed as the DG of Department of Public Enterprises. On the next slide, Mr. Seleke acted as a postman, if you can call it that. He received classified and confidential information from DPE, and he forwarded it to the Gupta family. On 7 January 2015, that's when it all started. He received an email from the China South Rail, a subsidiary of China South Rail, and that was immediately forwarded to Mr. Ashu Shawa, the COO of Sahara. On 7 August 2015, Mr. Seleke will forward a letter that he received from Mr. Machela Koko from Eskom regarding the Optimum Business, or from the Optimum Business Rescuers, where they discussed certain situations regarding the business rescue procedures of Optimum. That mail was sent by Mr. Koko to Mr. Seleke, and immediately he resent it to Mr. Shawa to keep the Gupta family, I believe, in the loop. Then on 4 November 2015, Eskom received a privileged legal opinion from senior counsel, and this legal opinion, once again, was sent by Mr. Koko to Mr. Seleke, and he will forward it to Mr. Tony Gupta. On the next slide, we carry on with Mr. Seleke. 4 November, Eskom will receive a letter from a company called Just Coal discussing a contract regarding coal supply and the problems that not only Just Coal but other few coal suppliers have got with Eskom. This letter, once again, sent from Mr. Mashela Koko to Mr. Tony Gupta, with Mr. Seleke being the postman. Then there's a range of annexes that you will see in the report where Mr. Seleke was always included in the Denel Asia matter, from where Denel Asia tried to form the joint venture and being created, etc., etc. Mr. Seleke, infoportal1@zoho.com, was always included in these mails. The reason we could not get behind what will the reason be. I mean, he is in a public position there, but why use this AKA email address? And I'm very sure that all the other people that he sent these mails to him or included him in this correspondence must have known who, what's the identity of infoportal1@zoho.com or businessman then. There is a wide range or a whole lot of these emails regarding Denel Asia, the forming of Denel Asia, etc. Then on 24 November 2015, Minister Lynn Brown sent a letter to Denel. It was marked very clearly in red, the original letter, as confidential. Mr. Seleke chose to forward this letter straight away to Mr. Ashu Chawa, and the evidence therefore and the documents also in the annexes to our report. Something that shows that Mr. Seleke was informed about or knew about the Tequesta matter, and Tequesta was the company that was set up to negotiate the locomotives deal back in 2015. Tequesta being the company of Mr. Salim Essa. For some reason, Mr. Seleke must have been part of this, or the explanation still unknown to us, but he was in possession of a Tequesta letterhead that he forwarded to Mr. Ashu Chawa. And we saw later on that there was various correspondence sent on these Tequesta letterheads. Lastly, regarding Mr. Seleke, on 1 March 2016, there was a spreadsheet prepared regarding the analyzing trends in the exchange rate of South Africa and the South African rand, as well as the ministers of finance, etc., sketching a whole picture regarding the financial state or the economic state of the country, also forwarded straight to Mr. Tony Gupta. That was received from, if I remember correctly, from financial company, the auditors that prepared this for publication, I believe. The next slide, we move on to Mr. Mashela Koko. As we all know, Mr. Koko was a former acting CEO of Eskom. I'm not going to repeat all of this. I think it was clearly stated. The correspondence that he forwarded, classified and confidential correspondence that he forwarded to Mr. Seleke, and that was then forwarded to the Gupta family. But on the last point there, 4 or 5 January 2016, Mr. Koko was also entertained by the Gupta family in the Oberoi Hotel in Dubai. And this invoice was paid by Sahara Computers. The evidence also in as annexes to our report. On the next slide, like I said, we're not going to go into depth with other individuals, persons, etc., not related to Eskom, but in our report also reported on Mr. Dan Mancha, the chairperson of the NEL, who were also flown to Dubai and, if I remember correctly, Delhi in India as well by the Gupta family on numerous occasions. Shortly, the first trip shortly after his appointment as the chairperson of the NEL. Mr. Ipal Sharma, a former non-executive director of Transnet Board, there is a big part in the report that shows his involvement with especially the locomotives transaction, as well as the VR laser situation, but like I said, not relevant to the Eskom report here. And then something that's not in the report, it's an ongoing investigation. Mrs. Kim Davids, it's the personal assistant to the Minister, to Minister Lynn Brown. She was also entertained by the Gupta family. If I remember the dates correctly, it was 27 December 2015 to 31st of December 2015, when she was flown to Dubai and paid for, stayed in the Oberoi Hotel and paid for by the Gupta family. Mr. Blom will take you through to the rest of our slides and our presentation regarding other companies and also the financials. I just want to make a last comment. At ALTA, we believe and that we are, or let me put it to you this way, a few months ago, a very prominent politician asked the country to stand up and to connect the dots. And I believe that this is what ALTA is trying to do, is to connect the dots. We see a lot of dots out there, and hopefully we can connect those and for a better future for all. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, honourable members.
Thank you very much. Oh, you're giving over to Mr. Mo.
If you can change the slide, please. To the next one. Okay, the people that I'm going to talk about will be done very briefly, because I think they're all characters that we know. In the discussions of Mr. Malefe's role at Eskom, I think what really comes to the fore is that there seems to be a lot of confusion as to how he arrived at Eskom and how he departed at Eskom. For instance, if you look at the...
Sorry for interruption. Can you please speak to the mic? So
My apologies.
Yeah.
If you look at an extract from the financial statements, we will see that they inform us that the change of directors took place for Mr. Malefe on the 31st of December. If we turn to the next slide, we see that there's a statement by Mr. Brian Malefe where he offers his resignation, but he offers it from the 1st of January 2017. Now, it might seem nebulous, but the fact of the matter is, if we're going to have a court case where these dates are all in dispute and not clarified, I can guarantee you who will win the outcome of this. As far as I can ascertain, and I've been involved with Eskom since 1988, when Eskom was still recognized as one of the top utilities in the world, top 5 utilities in the world, and half of my job was trying to fix up problem areas within Eskom, leading a team of postgrads. The other half of my job was taking investors and engineers from around the world to illustrate them how well Eskom was being managed and run to the benefit of, at that time, a part of the population at a very low cost. And that is something that really, really burns me, is how the costs of Eskom have run away under the last 3 regimes at Eskom. And I'll take you through that. If you can move to the next slide. As far as the involvement of Trillion Capital is concerned, and I believe in these houses there was a denial that there was any contract with Trillion Capital. At the financial statements announcement last week, Eskom board announced that there was a payment of 495 million to Trillion Capital. Several members of the board indicated that they had no knowledge of these payments. I put up on the slide an invoice dated the 31st of January 2016, addressed to Mr. Singh directly. 2 days before this, a letter was dispatched by Trillion Capital informing Mr. Singh that Trillion was the business development partner of McKinsey and asked for permission to be paid directly. I assume that Mr. Singh acquiesced to that request, otherwise this invoice wouldn't have followed 2 days later. The second thing about this invoice is the amount. The amount is an amount of around 30 million rand, and it's highlighted as a pro rata payment for the rewriting of the Eskom corporate plan. Now, I've been involved in writing corporate plans for the best part of my life, of business life of about 35 years. And in my whole history, I've never been involved in a corporate plan of such enormity. Notwithstanding the fact that it was part of my job when I was at Eskom in the late 80s. So I'm astounded that a pro rata payment for a corporate plan, and I assume it's in the order of 30% because Trillion was the 30% partner in the McKinsey joint venture, would indicate a payment of in excess of 100 million. And this is not the only corporate plan. It seems to me Eskom does a corporate plan every year, and it doesn't seem to affect the results in a positive manner. So the reason I highlight this invoice is firstly to indicate that Mr. Singh was the recipient of this invoice and instructed for it to be paid. So Mr. Singh cannot deny that he was unaware that Trillion Capital was a service provider to Eskom. If we can go to the next slide. In the documentation, I highlighted there the clause that indicates that Trillion was appointed a 30% service provider to McKinsey. If we go to the next slide, we see that McKinsey was paid 900 million in consulting fees. Now, I assume this is on top of the corporate plan consulting fees. However, Trillion received, according to the Eskom board last week, 495 million. It seems to me the maths has gone astray, because 495 million is not a third of 900 million. The reason I point this out to the committee is that it's obvious that even the Eskom board last Wednesday were clutching at feathers. They didn't know what they were talking about. If we can go to the next slide. During the presentation that the Eskom board presented to the press and later on to the investment analysts, I need to point out to the committee that I was declined the opportunity to ask questions at the press release. I suspect Eskom thought I might be grandstanding, but I was allowed to ask questions at the analysts' meeting afterwards. In neither of those presentations did Eskom mention anything about the qualification to their financial results by the auditors. They mentioned that the reason for the postponement of the annual financial results was due to legal issues relating to the labor issues around Mr. Koko and Mr. Molefe. When we got hold of the results after the meeting, it's also significant that the results were not available during the meeting. They were only handed out after the meeting. Madam Chair, as you can see, this is probably the smallest font I've ever seen financial results being printed in. It's about a 4 font in my estimate. But if you read carefully between the lines, you'll see there's in the middle of the page a reference to irregularities. And if you read the detail of those irregularities, it seems to me that the auditors, Sizwe Natabule, found irregular payments in the Eskom accounts amounting to some 3 billion rands. I say billion with a bravo. Madam Chair, it's a lot of money. It makes peanuts out of the fees that Trillion was earning and these other Gupta companies are earning. And the concern there is that Sizwe Natsibule could not find any source documents for these 3 billion rands of payments. Now, I'm aware, and a number of the members of this committee will be aware, that Eskom operates the SAP accounting system, SAP. And to the best of my knowledge, the system is incredibly robust, and that's why it's so widely popular around the world. And if you don't have all the details filled in and all the lines filled, you cannot process a payment in the SAP system, or a transaction for that matter. So all I can conclude, Madam Chair, is that from this statement, where 3 billion was processed without source documents, is that somewhere in Eskom, there's either somebody with a golden key who can override the SAP system, and we know that SAP has been receiving money from the Gupta family, or alternatively, there's an old checkbook that hasn't been burnt and is run in parallel to the SAP system, so that payments can be made without source documentation. Whichever the case may be, Madam Chair, it's a case for serious, serious concern. Because as easy as this 3 billion could disappear, so could the other billions in Eskom's treasury disappear. I ask that the committee focus on this when they do their full investigation, please. If you can go to the next slide. At the same financial presentation last week, the board indicated that they were totally unaware that Mr. Singh had signed off a financial guarantee in favor of Tegeta days before the optimum transaction was concluded to the tune of 1.68 billion rand. Madam Chair, it's a pity we can't read this font again because it's so small, but the clauses that are highlighted there indicate that all the corporate governance procedures have been fulfilled. And this is on an ABSA document. They were assured that all the corporate governance procedures had been fulfilled before ABSA endorsed this guarantee issued by Eskom in favor of Tegeta. Madam Chair, why do we present this document? The reason we present this document is not to advertise ABSA. The reason we present this document is to indicate that there is a fundamental breakdown of governance within Eskom, including Eskom's legal department, who allegedly also endorsed this document if you look at the last clause on this page. It is unheard of for a government entity to issue such magnitude guarantees for a private company to buy another private company. This is not for the source and supply of material. This is for one company to have the cash available to buy another company. Madam Chair, if you add this 1.6 billion together with the 600 odd million that Eskom prepaid for coal, it brings you to a princely sum of 2.1 billion, which just happens to be the asking price for optimum coal from Glencore. I don't think one needs to be a genius to add the two numbers together and to see that there's more to the story than we have been told. If we can move to the next slide, please. I mentioned earlier on in my deliberations that I'm very concerned about the costs of Eskom running away. I refer you here to an extract from the chairman's statement from the Eskom financials for 2005. Again, it's very fine print, but nevertheless, if you read the highlighted number there, I think it says 93 billion. And this 93 billion is the chairman's estimate of full capital expenditure that will be required by Eskom for the next 5 years. Madam Chair, that's from 2005 until 2010. I feel sad at having to mention this, because this number includes Medupi, ostensibly Kusile, as well as Ngula, 3 big capital projects that were on Eskom's radar at that time. I need to mention to the committee that I was consulting to Eskom from 2006 to 2008. I was pulled in, again, to help them resuscitate the coal procurement plan that had gone astray. And having previously worked at Eskom in the financial division responsible for coal procurement, it was very easy for me to regenerate the document. Whilst I was waiting for my time to pass and awaiting further instruction to help with the execution of the coal procurement plan, Mr. Damas removed the coal procurement department from the Eskom head office and instituted additional security around that building. I was not allowed into that building. During that time, around about mid-2008, I was showed an invoice or a quotation document for Medupi. To be complete, the first one I saw was for 26 billion. However, it was defective because it only included 4 units. I indicated that to the person who presented it to me. They went away and came back about a month and a half later with an invoice for 32 billion rand for Medupi Power Station 6-pack, as per Eskom's normal qualifications. I need to mention to the committee that at the same time, a power station tender was issued in India for a similar size for 35 billion rand. So the numbers seem to be more or less consistent, around the 30 billion odd rand for a 6-pack power station capable of generating more than 4,000 megawatts. My contract expired in October that year, notwithstanding the assurances I'd been given by the Eskom Financial Director, Mr. Bongani Nkubaba, who was subsequently pushed out of Eskom, that my contract would be extended for 10 years to ensure the proper implementation of the coal procurement plan. I was thus astonished when I saw later in the year that Eskom's board had approved the Medupi power station at 91 billion rand. Madam Chair, the question I need to ask is, where did the additional 60 billion come from? As events unfolded, we were subsequently informed that the suppliers to the Medupi power station had been swapped. Hitachi, which is known worldwide for its excellence in turbines, had been swapped out from its tender for the turbines to the boiler, and Alstom, which is known worldwide for its professionalism in boiler building, was swapped out to provide the turbine. And that's where the technical mess at Medupi started. I was also later informed that the parties, that Hitachi had to engage with a BE partner, which, for the record, happens to be Chancellor House. Madam Chair, I think those entities need to be interrogated to find out where the additional 60 billion rand in costs came from. If we go to Eskom's financials of last year, we see and we are informed that not only has Medupi escalated to well over 150 billion rand, but the same Mr. Damas took it upon himself to photocopy the Medupi contract and allocate the Kusile players without a tender. I think that is a gross irregularity. I have publicly been complaining about this since 2009. My record is in the press. You can go and have a look at it. And nobody believed me at the time that there was gross corruption within Eskom. I'd also come across more than 8 billion rand in my estimate at that time in coal frauds, where coal was allegedly being shipped from one power station to the other, defended by quality differences, but which was absolute nonsense. It was just fraud and more fraud and more fraud. I uncovered the fact that it was organized crime. I was told by Eskom's investigators that there was a syndicate of 54 people in that syndicate of the organized crime, including a very prominent member of parliament at that time. I asked this committee to investigate that further, please. If we can go to the next slide. For those who thought my 93 billion for the 3 projects was stupid and a guess, The director's report of 2005 again mentions, highlighted there, 93 billion for all Eskom capex for the next 5 years. Again, we must ask ourselves, how did 30 billion for Medupi become 150 billion today? And similarly for Kusile. Ngula's 20-odd billion became 40 billion. Madam Chair, there are vast amounts of money that are just disappearing in front of our eyes. If we can go to the next slide. As I mentioned up front, I'm very concerned that Eskom's money being blown away. If we go to that slide, we'll see at the bottom that in 2005, if we assume Eskom was efficiently run at that time, the cost of electricity was around about 16 cents a kilowatt hour. We were then all bulldozed into believing that Eskom couldn't fund the build through the markets and that we had to increase the tariffs drastically to pre-fund the power stations. At that time, I went public and said it was the most ridiculous proposal I've ever come across, because you don't pay for a house before you move into it. It's a long-term asset. You pay as you go. You take bonds and you go and you pay every year over the 40-odd years or longer. Eskom chased the electricity price up from 16 cents in 2005, and the latest application will take them to over R1 a kilowatt hour. If Eskom had been run efficiently as the NERSA regulations require for them to get a guaranteed price increase, we can take the Eskom price of 2005 and escalate it by CPI every year, by a factor of CPI, not the full CPI, because 2/3 of Eskom's costs are fixed. The bonds are not affected by inflation, and the fixed plant are not affected by inflation. They're spent monies. So only the operational cost escalates every year. If we add CPI to the 16 cents of 2005, Madam Chair, you and I should today not be paying more than 30 cents a kilowatt hour. Eskom will come to NERSA in the next month asking for over R1 a kilowatt hour. If we add up the excess monies that has been stolen from us by Eskom over the last 10 years, because they've fleeced our pockets by big increases, and behind our backs they've also gone to the bond market and raised government bonds of over 350 billion, plus non-government bonds of another 100-odd billion rand. So not only have they taken the money from our pockets, they've indebted our nation to the tune of over 350 billion rand for the same assets. If we add all that excess money together, we get over R1 trillion, Madam Chair. The assets were only supposed to cost 90 billion rand. I think Eskom owes us a massive refund, Madam Chair. To stop this nonsense, I'm going to ask this committee to investigate and to advise NERSA that the price, given that Eskom has now over-recovered more than 10 times the amount of money that they should have for these assets, that the operating price of electricity goes back to where it should have been had Eskom been operated efficiently, and that we immediately revert to a price of under 30 cents a kilowatt hour. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you very much, Madam Chair. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. The presentation on outer, is it complete now? Do you have any other person that needs to add on what you have said? Madam.
Honorable Lady Chair. Honorable Lady Chair, I would just like to say that OUTA would like to commend and thank this committee for giving the concerned citizens the opportunity to speak here. It shows that state capture is being dealt with seriously and with the contempt that it deserves. State capture touches many sectors of our public entities, and we're confident that we're going to see more of these. We want to say that, again, we are going to investigate many, many more matters. We've laid about 3 charges so far, and we're looking at charging Mr. Sileke next. We would like to thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam, we are working on time. People who are worried about time, I think they can see that we are working on time because our presentations are, they are being prepared very well so that we get everything in a small space of time, but you get more information. We will now give over to the third presenters, the last presenters of the day, which would be on the betrayal of the promise by the researchers, State Capacity Research Project. Thank you. I will give over to them now.
Honourable Chair, Ranto, thank you very much. To the Portfolio Committee, thank you very much, and to members, thank you. My name is Ivor Chipkin. I'm the Director of the Public Affairs Research Institute based at Wits University and also at the University of Cape Town. I have been part of a research collaboration which we call the State Capacity Research Group, which brings together and was originally convened by Mark Swilling from Stellenbosch University, the Centre for the Study of Complex Systems in Transition, Harun Borat at the Development Policy Research Unit at the University of Cape Town.
Sorry, can you please again speak to the mic, please?
Oh, sorry.
I know it's not easy.
I have to lean forward. All right, is that better?
The chairs are not comfortable.
Is that better? So again, it's my pleasure to be here. The betrayal of the Promise report is an attempt by South African academics to respond to the current situation, not simply by producing new information, putting in the information in the public domain, although I think we have done so, although I have to say that our report came out just as the Gupta leaks came out, so there's a lot more information which is in the public domain. But what we tried to do was to bring a whole range of new concepts to make sense of the current situation. So I think what has been reported and we've heard today are quite massive evidence of unethical behavior, immoral behavior, of illegality, and in many cases, straightforward criminality. What we've also found in the course of the work that we were doing was that underpinning these actions has been a political project, and this is what I want to talk about, and I think this is what the committee needs to come to terms with. That at the heart, what is facilitating the current illegality, criminality, and certainly immoral behavior is a political conviction, and I want to spend some time discussing that. The betrayal report has brought together information that was already largely in the public domain. What we've done, to use that expression originally used by former Minister of Finance Pravin Gordhan, was joining the dots. So we've brought information produced by leading journalists in South Africa, in particular, which have to be commended in the South African context, the team around Amabungani. Documents coming from government departments, National Treasury, Department of Trade and Industry, public enterprises, legal and court documents, statistical and financial sources. What we've done is we've collated this information, we've brought it together, and we've analyzed it together to see what story it tells. And what we say, as I say, is we find not just a story of criminality and illegality, we find at the heart of this is a political project and how it affects the state, and how state-owned enterprises come to play the enormous significant role in the current drama which we currently face. So that's the background to our group. What I think is important, and we need to recognize the importance of the current moment. If I think back merely several weeks ago when we started doing this work earlier this year, the attention on the current political situation was not nearly as substantial as it is today, and I have to applaud this portfolio committee for taking these actions, because what it shows and it gives evidence of is a growing political will to address the situation. You're seeing a large mobilization of civil society organizations. There was a conference in Johannesburg last Tuesday, the largest gathering of civil society organizations in South Africa since 1994. A growing mobilization of political parties and of various forces in South African society around the issues of state capture. So I think this is to be celebrated, and I think it creates, therefore, an opportunity for a new kind of consensus going forward. A consensus premised on three things, and what we'll, as you'll see, discuss now. One is on a real model of economic transformation, which is absolutely necessary, which I'll talk about in a moment. Secondly, is a reaffirmation of the principles of the Constitution and a commitment to South Africa's democracy. And thirdly, a recommitment to a project of state building and public service reform. So I think we're in an opportunity where those three principles can be aligned and we can achieve potentially another historic breakthrough in South Africa. So let me go to the substance of the report, and I will gear my remarks to specifically around Eskom, although there's some background that's required because Eskom is an instance of a larger phenomenon which focuses on the state-owned enterprises. But I'll gear my remarks towards the examples I give will be around Eskom. So what we've argued is that underpinning the current situation, as I mentioned, is a political conviction. And the political conviction, we think, arises in the aftermath of 2007, after the Polokwane revolt within the African National Congress, which we argue was a fundamental repudiation of the political economy of the Thabo Mbeki years, and its particular economic and social features. So even though the Thabo Mbeki years under Gear had produced the fastest economic growth that South Africa has seen in the last 30, 40 years, we approached almost 5%. The argument that emerged in the aftermath of Polokwane, an argument which I think is absolutely was correct, was that this growth was associated with the emergence of a small elite, a small economic elite, a vulnerable middle class, and massive then economic exclusion. An economic exclusion which took particular form, economic exclusion for people in rural areas, and in urban areas, in informal settlements, and on the margins of the cities, massive economic exclusion. And who were excluded fundamentally? It's a lot of people unlikely that are present in this room. People that didn't speak English fluently or spoke very accented English. It's people that weren't educated at all or weren't very well educated. These are the people that have been marginalized fundamentally by that model of economic growth of the early 2000s. So what you see after Polokwane is the search for more radical models of economic transformation, especially ones that will put South Africa on a more inclusive growth path, to use the current terminology, but one that can undo and reshape the fundamentals of the South African economy. And there are a whole range of models that begin to emerge. We know, for example, Julius Malema, as the former head of the ANC Youth League, is promoting a return to the principles of the Freedom Charter, the nationalization of land and of the mines. In other parts of the ANC, though, other models of economic transformation are being searched for. The first idea is mooted by the Department of Economic Development, is around public procurement, very quietly in the new growth path. These ideas are taken up in parts of the ANC, but especially within the Department of Trade and Industry, which starts seeing public procurement, and especially the public procurement of state-owned enterprises, as a route through which massive economic transformation can be achieved. We find a document from the Department of Trade and Industry from 2011 listing all the state-owned enterprises and listing the procurement budgets, producing a figure of about 210 billion rand, 210 billion rand of procurement spent in only 13 state-owned enterprises, which the argument when, and this is the first time we hear the expression radical economic transformation, we can use that procurement spend to do two things: displace existing white firms, but also encourage the emergence of new black-owned and black-owned enterprises. In other words, one can use the procurement budgets of state-owned enterprises to create, if you like, a new kind of black-owned and black-controlled industrial economy. It's very easy to see why these ideas are compelling and very, very exciting. I think they are exciting ideas. We argue, though, and this becomes very, very key in the analysis, during that period, though, there's a turn. And we don't believe the turn is necessary. We believe it is contingent. In other words, it's not produced by a necessary following of the logic. We argued around 2011, around 2012, the protagonists of radical economic transformation, this model of using the state-owned enterprises and using the procurement budgets of state-owned enterprises to engineer an economic transformation, increasingly start turning against the Constitution, and in particular constitutional bodies like the National Treasury. And the argument here, I think, is quite technical, so forgive me for a moment. If you look at the final constitution in relationship to the interim constitution, you will notice two surprising developments. In the interim constitution, National Treasury is not mentioned at all. In the final constitution, the National Treasury is a constitutional body, which means how the National Treasury behaves is not a matter of policy and is not a matter of legislation. It is dictated to by the Constitution. That's the first thing. The second development, which is also surprising, is that public procurement is a constitutional matter. It is in the Constitution. Perhaps the crafters of our Constitution were very prescient about how South African politics might develop in the coming years. The constitutional provision around procurement requires that two principles are reconciled. They clearly imagined that they were easily reconcilable, or perhaps reconcilable with some difficulty, but nonetheless reconcilable. So there are two principles in public procurement in the Constitution. The first one is what we might call a principle of good value. It requires, this is not at the discretion of the minister, it's not at the discretion of the ruling party, it's not a matter of policy, it is a constitutional requirement that requires that public procurement pays attention to price, the price of the goods or services that are being acquired, the competency of the service provider, and their experience. Those are constitutional requirements. The second principle is a principle of what we might call equity. It requires that public procurement favours previously disadvantaged people in South Africa. So the crafters of the Constitution clearly imagined that these two principles were reconcilable. Good value for money and economic justice. What is interesting, we start seeing around 2010, 2011, the protagonists of radical economic transformation are increasingly arguing that not only are those principles irreconcilable, but they are actually in fundamental contradiction. That you cannot pursue procurement which does justice, which achieves the purposes of economic justice or economic transformation in a way that achieves good value at the same time. So you see within the Department of Trade and Industry, but also from various groups, including the Black Management Forum, pressure on the National Treasury to include a 30% set-aside clause. In other words, that 30% of all public procurement is granted to black-owned and black-controlled firms, irrespective of experience, irrespective of price. We see in 2011 tremendous pressure on the National Treasury to pass those resolutions and extend those the black economic empowerment considerations to state enterprises. And the former Minister of Finance does not do it. We think it's a key moment of the radicalization of the project of radical economic transformation, and increasingly the idea that National Treasury is an obstacle to this project. What we argue, and this is, I think, very, very important in how we understand what the developments of Treasury, we argue and we are able to demonstrate it, I think, quite clearly, and the evidence produced by OCHA and by the South African Council of Churches, I think, confirm this over more and more, and the Gupta leaks confirm it more and more, is what you see in this turn away from the Constitution and a sense that constitutional is an obstacle to radical economic transformation, and so is the law. It creates a general environment for illegality and growing criminalization. And what you start seeing from that period on is a growing illegality in the way in which state-owned enterprises are behaving. Much evidence has already been placed before this committee on what that looks like. The first examples are in Transnet around the procurement of trains to the value of 51 billion rand. We now know some of the detail around that contract, where it looks like the Gupta family were receiving 10 million rand for every 50 million rand train. It's just an extraordinary slice of the money that is leaking to the Guptas. In 2015, though, there's another cabinet reshuffle. Brian Molefi's moved from Transnet to Eskom. The Eskom board is changed. Many people are brought in, as the public protector revealed later. Public protector demonstrates that many of the new board members have very close or immediate links to the Gupta family. I'm not going to go through all the details. Let me just give you one example, though, which I think is a startling example. And you know some of the details, but one element of it hasn't come out as clearly as it should. And I think it gives a good sense of, for this committee going forward, some of the areas which you might want to probe around. It's around the value of the coal contracts. You know the story of the Glencore mine, Optimum. It's been discussed earlier. Optimum Mine providing coal to Eskom power stations. The value of its contract historically was 325 million rand per annum. It's providing low-quality coal to the mines, to the power station. Brian Molefe comes on board as the CEO of Eskom. A fine is imposed on Glencore because of the low quality of the coal, of over 2 billion rand. It pushes the Optimum Mine into near bankruptcy, or to bankruptcy finally. Glencore appealed to renegotiate the contract under Brian Molefe's tutorship. They refused to renegotiate. The mine goes into bankrupt. The mine goes bankrupt. There are those extraordinary details that emerged around the Minister of Mines moving to Dubai to conclude that contract with Tegeta. We know those details, and I'm not going to go through them again. But what is extraordinary is the value of that contract. Almost immediately if you go to the website of the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, the new office which is established to provide oversight of procurement deals in South Africa. They show there's a little tab called Irregularities and Expansions, and you will see in that tab the value of the coal contract goes from 325 million rand per annum to 7 billion rand per annum. It's an extraordinary escalation, especially you have to remember that this is the same pile of low-quality coal that Eskom was historically paying a much, much lower price for. So I think there has been a lack of transparency on Eskom's side around those coal contracts. It is definitely an area which I think this committee needs to probe with some degree of vigor. So the Tegeta coal contract is merely one contract amongst a whole range of contracts, and as the delegation from OTA have explained, I think this is definitely what is driving up the costs of electricity and the costs of running the South African electricity system generally. So this is what is going on. We argue that there's a move to illegality, clear signs, I think, of criminality. But here is where I think things it's very, very important to understand the effects outside of the state-owned enterprises into the broader state system and into the broader political system in South Africa. So what we argue, and we're able to demonstrate, I think, quite clearly, is that at the same time there is the shift to illegality and even to criminality, this idea again that one needs to operate outside the law, one needs to operate outside the constitution in order to facilitate this model of economic transformation. We see moves against other state institutions, especially those state institutions that have built up a large investigative capacity and even a prosecutorial capacity. The first of those, of course, is the South African Revenue Services, which by 2014-2015 has built up into a formidable institution. SARS, of course, is one of the great heroic stories of post-apartheid South Africa, and it's worth just dwelling on it for a moment.
You're still with SABC News. I'm Alicia Jali. Let's take you live now to the North Gauteng High Court, where Issa Pahad is currently giving testimony in the Pahad, or rather the Ahmed Timol inquest that is taking place at the North Gauteng